and me and my crew ticked off a lot of places over the years. There are the big grain silos in Pilsen, left empty after a big explosion, and then near Joliet there's an old prison with cells and chapels now open for tours. In Gary, Indiana, we saw this incredibly beautiful but decaying church. Then, under Chicago, there are old freight tunnels, mostly closed off now, that were anything but beautiful. The old Chicago post office was huge and empty for years, and there's the old Cook County Hospital, now becoming a hotel but once a place right out of Silent Hill. But then, after a while, we started looking further to hit up places that we hadn't been before, and that's when we heard about a place in the middle of nowhere over in Iowa called Buckhorn. Back in the 1900s, Buckhorn used to be a pretty prosperous place because of the big creamery that they had in town. It used to turn out hundreds of tons of butter a week, and it employed almost everyone in town. But then, when rising costs forced the creamery to shut down, it meant just about the whole town was suddenly out of work overnight. And with no jobs, people started leaving, one family at a time. Then I think by the 80s or early 90s, the place was just a total ghost town. We did some research online, mainly using Urbex forums where others would post about their experiences, and drew up a list of places we wanted to visit. There was obviously the old creamery, which was huge and falling apart, but there was also the abandoned church and cemetery we could take a look at, along with a handful of other places too. It looked like a great place to explore. The only drawback was the 4-hour car ride, and since it was late October when we got the urge to visit, it meant starting the journey at the crack of dawn if we wanted to hit up all of our chosen spots before it went dark. So, one day in early November, we loaded up my friend Mike's van, and then we drove off down Highway 64 in the direction of the Iowa state line. The weather was miserable when we hit the road. A cold, gray Saturday morning that I'd much rather have just spent in bed. But honestly, Urbex when the weather is nice feels kind of odd, and no filter in existence makes a place feel gloomier or creepier than a naturally overcast sky. And on top of that, the prospect of hitting up a brand new place kept us so excited that we didn't mind that the heating in Mike's van was completely broken. And besides, each of us was dressed for the Arctic, so the cold was at the back of our minds as we got closer and closer to Buckhorn. When we arrived, the town was exactly as you'd imagine, empty and silent, with buildings that looked like they'd crumble if you so much as looked at them for too long. The streets were overgrown with weeds, and apart from the sound of the wind whispering around the abandoned buildings, it was completely silent. We started at the old schoolhouse, a building that seemed to sag under the weight of its own rotting structure, and inside, the air was musty and dank, and there were leaks almost everywhere from the previous day's rain. How the place was still standing was beyond me, and I was way more worried about it coming down on our heads, even after I saw what was written on the chalkboard. Mike pointed it out at first, directing us into a classroom that had the word "Danger" written on the chalkboard in big white letters with an exclamation point. Mike was smiling when he showed us, and it got a little chuckle out of me too. You see a lot of that kind of spooky graffiti around well-trodden Urbex sites, and it's usually a little more creative than just danger. You pay attention to official-looking signs and warnings about unstable structures or active power cables and all of that, but when it comes to stuff like "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here," or "Pennywise's lair," you tend not to take it very seriously. And we figured the danger on the chalkboard amounted to some other Urbexer's tag, like an unsettling way of saying, "I got here first." But these days, I think that graffiti was much more significant than we first imagined. We moved on to the other classrooms, checking the chalkboards for more messages, but there was nothing. And I remember the desk being covered in a thick layer of dust, and after wiping at some of it with his glove to see just how thick it really was, Mike started playfully chasing us around and threatening to wipe that grime on one of our jackets. And that's when I first noticed something was off with our friend Tom. He was usually the most enthusiastic of us. His camera was always ready, his curiosity was boundless, but that day, he seemed tired and distracted, almost like he was in some kind of daze. He barely reacted as Mike came at him, and when he did notice what was on his finger, he didn't really even find it funny. He just snapped at Mike. Not overly harshly or anything, but we knew that the joke was over and moved on from the school to the general store. The shelves were still stocked with cans made by brands that we'd never heard of, and some of their labels faded so badly that we could barely read them. Tommy stayed quiet as we walked the aisles, which, again, was totally not like him. By the time we got to the old town hall, his behavior had gotten even weirder. He seemed like he was muttering to himself, his eyes darting around like he was seeing things that we couldn't. Then suddenly, Tommy reached up and just started clutching his nose. Blood poured out, dark and thick and staining his gray gloves, and he looked scared. We tried to help, but he backed up and held out an arm like, "Get the hell off of me." And his nose was bleeding so much that one of us actually asked if Tommy was good to keep going, but the idea seemed to just irritate him even more than his nosebleed did. He said we hadn't driven all that way to just turn around and leave over a nosebleed, and in the moment, I appreciated how unselfish it sounded. No one wanted to just leave, not if we could avoid it. So as Mike went into his pack to get our first aid kit so Tommy could stem the blood coming out of his nose, I wandered off alone towards the old sheriff's office to take a look around. It looked much like I had imagined it to at first. Reception area, back office, hallway leading to what must have been cells of some description. It wasn't immediately visible from the front door, but the second I turned the corner into the reception area, I saw it. In huge black letters, daubed in what must have been spray paint, were the words, "If you bleed, leave Buckhorn and never return." The sight of it sent literal shivers down my spine immediately, and I ran back to tell the others. I told them that we had to leave, but again, Tommy objected. And I started to explain that what I'd seen written on the wall of the sheriff's office, and as I did, Mike and the others started to listen. But I still only got a couple of words out before Tommy went nuts and started screaming at me. He says something like, "How many times do I have to say it? We're not leaving, all right?" Then as he started walking towards me, still yelling, others jumped in to hold him back, thinking that he was about to punch me. We worked to calm him down, and it kind of seemed like we did at first. But then, when I look back on it, I think that's when that weird kind of fatigue started to set in. We basically managed to drag Tommy back to the van after he stopped struggling because we were convinced that he was going through some kind of medical emergency. He offered to take him to the hospital, but all he wanted to do was go home. The drive back was just quiet and very tense. Tommy's nosebleed had stopped, but he was very pale, and his breathing shallow, and he passed out before we even hit the highway, and his body was just limp against the seat. We tried to wake him when we got back to town, but he was unresponsive, barely stirring even when we shook him. The fact that he even showed signs of life was a huge relief. Then, when we finally got him to his apartment, Tommy was acting like someone recovering from some deep sleep, very groggy, very confused. And we just left him to rest, and we asked his mom and sister to keep an eye on him after telling them what had happened, but we were all very shaken by what had taken place. The image of that warning on the wall, the nosebleed, and the fear in Tommy's eyes had just all played over and over again in my mind. And lying in bed that night, I couldn't shake off the unease of what we'd seen. Why did Tommy react that way? And what was it either in or about Buckhorn that made him act like that? The warning in the sheriff's office was very clear, but its implications were terrifying. Was it some kind of chemical exposure? And if so, why was it only Tommy who reacted that way? I thought about the stories that I'd heard of Buckhorn, tales of that town that once thrived but fell due to reasons that were never quite clear. And I'd read about the creamery shutting down, but it didn't occur to me until then that it didn't say why the creamery was shut down in any of the posts that I'd read. Some spoke of economic downfall, but there was nothing about a mysterious illness or any other kind of unexplained events that led to its abandonment. The next day, I did some research, but found nothing that could really explain what had happened to him. There were no records of toxic spills, no known unusual occurrences officially documented, yet the physical and psychological impact on Tom was undeniable, and we all saw it. It scared the hell out of us. He was the only one who bled and the only one who started acting strange like that, or at least strange in a way that we could see and recognize. I wrote this down not because I'm good with words, but because I need to warn others. If you ever hear about Buckhorn, if someone suggests a reason to visit, just don't. Stay the hell away from that place. Whatever's there isn't just the ghosts of the past, it's something that can reach out and touch you and make you bleed, make you lose yourself. My friend has recovered, but honestly, you might pay a very high price uncovering whatever secrets that place holds. What feels like a lifetime ago, I decided to go visit a friend living in San Francisco, which involved driving just over 1,000 miles from our hometown of Montrose, Colorado. My plan was drive all the way through Utah in a single day, spend the night at the Holiday Inn in a little place called Ely, Nevada, and then drive the rest of the way to San Fran after a good night's sleep and a decent breakfast. Thankfully, I made it on time and in one piece, but that didn't mean that the journey went smoothly. It might sound funny, but I'd never been to Utah before the drive to San Francisco. It's less than 100 miles west of Montrose, but if I left town, it was usually to drive east to Boulder or maybe Denver. I knew eastern Colorado could be pretty desolate, but Utah was a whole other story. By the time I drove through a place called Delta, the landscape looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. The road had been nothing but a straight line through the desert for hours, and about 30 to 45 minutes past Delta, I realized that I messed up. I should have stopped for gas when I had the chance, and by the time I realized my gas gauge was creeping towards empty, I started to panic a little bit. The last thing I wanted was to be stranded in the middle of nowhere, so you can imagine my relief when I suddenly saw a sign up ahead. It was the first sign of civilization since I'd left Delta, a solitary gas station sign which read, "Last Chance Gas 5 miles." I thanked God out loud, not that I'm really a believer, but you get where I'm coming from. And then a few minutes later, I spotted what looked like a small town coming up on the horizon. It sort of clung to the highway, this cluster of dilapidated buildings with peeling paint and broken windows. Not the nicest place I'd ever seen, but it was a very welcome sight. Gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the station, and there was no one at the pumps, no cars in sight, and no sign of life from the small store attached to the station. When I turned off the engine, I was suddenly struck by how quiet everything was. I glanced around and saw the town was eerily still. People talk about sleepy desert towns, but I remember thinking, sleepy? This place is in a goddamned coma. Approaching the gas pump, I noticed it was of an old model, the kind that you don't really see anymore. The nozzle felt heavy, and the kind of heavy where it feels like it was designed to just last forever. But when I tried to pump gas, there was just no flow. I shook it, gave it a tap against the pump, hoping that might fix it, but there was nothing. It was like the pump itself was just completely empty. Assuming that there was some trick to getting the pump to work that only the station's attendant might know, I went into the old gas station to look for some help. The door creaked when I opened it, and a bell rang, sounding weirdly loud, and the place looked old, very old. Snacks on the shelves were vintage, like those bright, colorful candies from like decades ago, and the cash register was almost from another era, all metal, very heavy, with just huge buttons. And the posters on the walls were very faded, showing promotions for movies and events from probably all the way back in 2001. And when I got there, this was, I think, the fall of 2009. I called out hello, but my voice just echoed back at me and no one seemed to answer. On the counter, there was an old newspaper from 8 years ago talking about some kind of festival, and the calendar behind the counter was stuck on the same date as that newspaper, still showing June 2001. And that's when I started to feel very uneasy. I went to check the back room, and the door was open a little, and inside was more of the same. There was a mug with what looked like old, dry remains of coffee at the bottom, a coat still hanging on the back of a chair, and a silent radio that was plugged in but not playing anything. I found a ledger with the last entry on the same day as the newspaper, and it was like everyone in town just disappeared on that day. I left the back room and saw through the window that the playground across the street was empty, swings moving gently in the wind, but no kids or adults around. Then on the way back to my car, I just felt this burning curiosity taking over my unease, and I decided to just look around a little more in the town before I drove off. Every door I tried was locked, and every window was dusty with grime and soot, like no one had been there for a long time. In one house, the door was slightly open, and inside it was like whoever lived there had stepped out of their house in the expectation they'd be back in mere minutes, but they'd never come back. A book was open on a couch. There was another glass of dried something with dead mold clinging to the rim of it, and upstairs, a kid's room had toys scattered on the floor like play had just suddenly stopped and never resumed. I knew that I shouldn't have been in there, but I just had to check. And after I backed out of that kid's room, two thoughts were going back and forth in my head. The first being, just what in the hell was I thinking walking around a total stranger's house? It was like I came to my senses thinking, what if all these good but slightly untidy folks are at a county fair or something, and some psycho, me, is just wandering around their homes? I also appreciate how in denial that sounds, but never underestimate the mind's ability to try and rationalize things in favor of going into complete fight or flight mode. But the second thought was more in lines with, okay, I'm pretty sure something bad happened to these people, and if I don't get the hell out of here, whatever happened to them is going to happen to me too. And I hurried back to my car, feeling like I really shouldn't be there now, but also with that horrible feeling that someone was watching me, even though I was 99% sure the place was completely abandoned. In my car, I tried my phone, really didn't have any reception, and next I actually tried the radio, and it was just crappy static. I mean, I guess we technically were in like a dead zone out there. As I started the car, I was worried that I was going to run out of gas and end up stranded in the middle of nowhere. But that place had me so unsettled that it seemed worth the risk. If I got stranded, it'd suck, but it was damn sure preferable to staying in that place for even a minute longer. And thankfully, I had just enough gas to make it to cross the state line and actually make it to Ellie. But by the time I rolled into Chevron, I'm not even exaggerating when I said I was running on fumes. As I filled up my car, I noticed that I had some bars finally on my phone, but since I didn't want to use it at the gas station, they still had signs up back then saying, "Please do not use your cell phone." And I went inside to ask the clerk if I could use their phone instead, which would also give me the chance to ask them about that abandoned town. The clerk seemed to have no idea what I was talking about, but that didn't really surprise me, I suppose. What did was how matter-of-fact the deputy sheriff was when I called his office back in Utah. The clerk knew enough to know that I must have come through Millard County if I'd been on Route 50, so I knew I had the right people when I called them up after looking through the phone book. The first deputy I talked to knew what I was talking about and knew the place. They called it Millburg, that it had been abandoned for a number of years, and he just really didn't know why, I guess. I then asked if I could talk to someone higher up, and he put me on the phone with the deputy sheriff who, like I said, was very open about some things. He just wasn't so open about others. When I told him about the abandoned town, he actually gave me a little chuckle as he was like, "Oh, yeah, you must have stopped in Millburg. The place has been empty for years now." He told me I had nothing to worry about, and despite it looking very creepy, there was nothing sinister about the place at all. More like, the place had been scheduled for demolition for a few years, but the people who bought the land couldn't get permits. So, till they did, Millard County had its very own ghost town, one that even attracted the odd tourists who actually enjoyed getting the willies from being in an abandoned place like Millburg. And I'll be honest, the sheriff's answer was actually very reassuring, and I felt kind of silly for having worked myself up into a minor freakout over it. But then, just before we were about to end that call, I asked the sheriff why Millburg had been abandoned. And he paused and then asked me, "You some kind of reporter?" And when I told him no, he said if I wanted to talk about it, I was more than welcome to stop by their office over in Fillmore, and he was much more comfortable talking about it face to face rather than over the phone. Now call me paranoid, but I think that was sort of like a bluff or something. I think he was counting on me to not stop by the office to talk about this, and he was kind of right because I didn't. I kept going towards San Francisco, and was only like an hour or so later than my schedule, so like I said at the start, I made it in one piece and on time. But it was majorly on my mind for the rest of that day, and my friends and I, who I'd driven all the way out there to see, had a long talk about it that evening, and it amounted to this. My friends basically said that yeah, something bad probably did happen out there in Millburg, but that it wasn't something I should be fixating on. The right authorities seemed to be on top of it, and no wonder the deputy sheriff was cautious of reporters. He'd probably been burned in the past after some loose talk made it into the papers, and my friend thought it was basically a case of my imagination getting the better of me after having stopped somewhere that I shouldn't have. I mentioned the fact that if I have stopped in Delta for gas like I was supposed to, I'd have just rolled through Millburg like it was any other town, and it wouldn't have been on my mind like it was. My friend then told me to live in that reality, pretend that I'd never even seen Millburg, because when it comes to events where whole towns disappear, sometimes ignorance truly is bliss. That helped me keep Millburg off my mind for a couple of days, but obviously when the trip drew to an end, I had to drive back the way I came. I considered taking a diversion and stopping in Fillmore to see if I could talk to the deputy sheriff again, but then I was reminded of what my friend told me, and after making sure that I had enough gas, I floored it after seeing Millburg in the distance, zooming through that town in barely 2 or 3 seconds, and I didn't look back, not even for a second. On May 20th of 1999, the South Australian police were investigating a missing persons case linked to the city of Adelaide when they received a tip from an informant. They were to drive 80 miles north to a small municipality of around 300 people named Snowtown. Once there, they were to make their way to the old abandoned bank on First Street and conduct a thorough inspection of the bank's vault. 2 South Australian police officers drove for hours along the nation's A1 highway. Then upon their arrival in Snowtown, they parked their cruiser outside the abandoned bank. After gaining access to the secure structure and with their flashlights at the ready, the 2 officers crept down dark and dusty hallways until they reached the bank's vault. There, they found the large steel door had been left ajar. Then after pulling it open, they discovered half a dozen large plastic barrels. The officers must have had their suspicions, but to be certain, one of them crept forwards and peeled back just a small portion of one of the barrel's lids. And the stench was overpowering. After a total of 8 human corpses were pulled out of the 6 plastic drums, the Australian media went into a veritable frenzy. The previously sleepy village of Snowtown became the center of a gruesome investigation, capturing national attention and sending the general public into a state of near panic. They demanded a swift and robust response from the South Australian police, who were to open an investigation into the murders immediately. But they were told that, in truth, law enforcement had been investigating a series of disturbing disappearances for the past 5 years, and their case seemed to center around a man named John Bunting. John Justin Bunting was born on September 4th of 1966 in Inala, Queensland, and it's believed that he had a relatively normal and stable upbringing. State social services have no records of him being abused or neglected by his parents. Until the age of 8, his school reports painted a picture of a perfectly normal little boy. But shortly after entering the 3rd grade, something terrible happened to little Johnny Bunting. While playing at the home of a neighbor, 8-year-old Johnny found himself alone in a room with his friend's much older brother. John was cornered, beaten, and then carnally assaulted by a boy much older and stronger than him, and the experience left him with a profound hatred of both homosexuals and pedophiles. As a teenager, he developed a healthy fascination with photography and was said to have a talented eye for composition. His fixation with human anatomy, on the other hand, was, to put it mildly, not so healthy. But on what bordered on downright pathological was John's obsession with acts of physical violence. At age 22, Bunting found work at a Queensland abattoir and was not only highly proficient in his work, but reportedly bragged about enjoying the factory-style slaughter he and his coworkers indulged in. In 1991, a 25-year-old Bunting would relocate to the Adelaide suburb of Salisbury, and here he befriended two of his neighbors, 20-year-old Robert Joe Wagner and 33-year-old Mark Ray Hayden. Bunting was known to be intensely charismatic and could exert significant psychological control over others. He also had a highly dominant personality and relished the opportunity to take on a leadership role within his group, which included people who were vulnerable, disaffected, and looking for direction. Over the next few years, Bunting curated a small but viciously loyal social circle of those who shared his deep hatred for pedophiles, homosexuals, and others he deemed morally corrupt. But over time, what started as a kind of recreational outrage transformed into something deeper and darker, something more like ideology than opinion. He then went about convincing his acolytes that they should engage in vigilante justice, drawing others into his worldview through slow but persistent indoctrination. He would become a central figure in their lives, providing a sense of belonging or family, which was crucial for people like Mark Hayden, Robert Wagner, and James Vlasikis. These men became accomplices in what Bunting framed as a moral crusade, but was, in reality, a terrifying spree of sadistic violence motivated by greed, control, and prejudice. The murders began in August of 1992, when a 20-year-old man named Clinton Douglas Tresize was invited over to Bunting's apartment on the pretense of a social call. Bunting, having acted as both judge and jury, had declared Tresize an abuser of children. Then, right there in his living room, in front of his baying adherents, he beat the 20-year-old to death with a shovel and then had him buried in a shallow grave. In 1997, Tresize was the subject of 2 episodes of the Australian television show Australia's Most Wanted. Bunting watched an episode of the show with Vlasikis and his mother and reportedly boasted, "That's my handiwork." 26-year-old Ray Davies was Bunting's next target, because in 1993, he entered into a relationship with an ex-girlfriend of Bunting's named Suzanne Allen. Reportedly to be intellectually disabled, he was accused of making inappropriate advances towards Allen's grandsons, yet these allegations appear flimsy at best. Following the termination of their relationship, Ray Davies and Suzanne Allen remained close friends, and the former actually lived on the latter's property in a small caravan at the time he was targeted. To some, this was testament to the idea that the accusations had been spurious, but to Bunting, it was evidence of a vile conspiracy between the two. And on Boxing Day of 1995, Suzanne Allen's daughter witnessed Bunting and her mother clearing out Davies' caravan. Bunting later told James Vlasikis that he had murdered Ray Davies on Christmas Day, not only with the assistance of his wife, but also Vlasikis' own mother. They had reportedly stabbed him in both legs, immobilizing him before Robert Wagner strangled him unconscious. The group then drove 90 minutes to a home in a town known as Bakara, where they tossed their victim into an empty bathtub and tortured him. Initially, the purported purpose of the torture was to get Davies to reveal his bank details, and if he did, he was assured that his anguish would cease. It was a lie. Once the group had drained his bank account, Davies was beaten to death with the same sharpened metal pole used to mutilate his genitals. and next on the list was Davies and Bunting's ex-girlfriend, 47-year-old Suzanne Allen. According to Bunting, she was being targeted for execution due to her perverse collusions with Ray Davies. In reality, Bunting simply wanted her money. It's unclear how she was killed, but Allen's plastic-wrapped remains were discovered buried at Bunting's Salisbury property in May of 1999. Following her murder, Bunting claimed $17,000 of her pension through fraudulent means. Although Allen most likely died by Bunting's hand, charges were eventually dropped by the prosecution due to their lack of evidence, and the perpetrators were tried but not found guilty as a result of a hung jury. And her case was never tried again. Next up was 19-year-old Michael Gardner, a cousin of Robert Wagner's wife. By September of 1997, Gardner had been cross-dressing for a number of years, thus drawing the ire of the highly homophobic Bunting. Bunting had reportedly witnessed him playing with Wagner's children when he grabbed one of them by the arm and placed his hand over their mouth. Small children sometimes say some pretty terrible things, partly out of malice and partly out of ignorance. So, from the sounds of it, Gardner had simply heard one of the children say something rude or explicit and was attempting to correct them with an easily understood but ultimately physical gesture. Yet to Bunting, the sight proved a potent reminder of his own carnal violation at the hands of his friend's older brother, and in that moment, Bunting decided Gardner had to die. He and Robert Wagner somehow convinced Gardner to accompany them to a place called Murray Bridge. There, Gardner was taken to a shed, then repeatedly strangled as a form of torture. Every time he collapsed due to lack of oxygen, Bunting and Wagner would force the teenager to stand up straight before they strangled him all over again. Finally, when Gardner passed out for a fourth or fifth time, Bunting kept his hands wrapped around his victim's throat, squeezing and tightening his grip until Gardner expired. The two killers then staged a robbery at Gardner's apartment, stealing some of his landlady's belongings. When this landlady somehow got in touch with Bunting to inquire after her errant tenant's whereabouts, he convinced her that Gardner had been the one to burglarize her residence in order to pay for a sex change operation. Gardner's decomposing corpse was then kept in a plastic barrel in the very same shed he was murdered in until it was eventually moved to the Snowtown bank vault. His left foot had been severed so the drum's lid could be properly sealed. Bunting's next victim was another ex-girlfriend, 42-year-old Vanessa Lane. Bunting had previously welcomed Lane into his circle of acolytes due to her willingness to aid in the hunt for child molesters, yet ironically, her home was firebombed after she too was accused of grooming a local schoolboy. In the aftermath of the firebombing, she attempted to lay low, but ended up beginning a relationship with an 18-year-old boy by the name of Thomas Trevelyan. Somehow, Trevelyan ended up reaching out to John Bunting, whereby he was informed that Lane had been grooming and molesting him long before he came of age. It's unclear why Trevelyan would betray his new girlfriend in such a way, but the move undoubtedly signed the woman's death warrant. And on October 17th of 1997, Bunting, Wagner, and Trevelyan picked Vanessa Lane up from her home, apparently following some kind of reconciliation. Lane was then prompted to verbally abuse her own mother via telephone, then told to inform her that she wanted nothing more to do with her, was moving to Queensland, and was never coming back. In all likelihood, Lane was led to believe that the rebuke of her own mother would prove her loyalty to the group. In reality, it was a trap. Should she suddenly disappear, Lane's mother was just about the only person who cared enough to report her daughter missing. With the relationship in jeopardy, Lane became an easy target, and one by one, her toes were crushed with metal pliers as she was tortured for her bank account details. When she revealed them, she was promptly strangled to death. Less than a month later, on November 4th of 1997, an increasingly unhinged Thomas Trevelyan began chasing a dog around his neighborhood while armed with a knife. Having reportedly been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, Bunting saw Trevelyan as a liability that, and I quote, would go mental on them. The next day, under the pretense of undertaking another bashing, as Bunting referred to the murders, Bunting drove Trevelyan to Kersbrook in the Adelaide Hills. He was discovered hanging from a tree in Humbug Scrub the following day. Next on the chopping block was an associate of James Velasquez, a 29-year-old named Gavin Porter. A diagnosed schizophrenic, Porter moved to Adelaide from Victoria following the death of his mother in 1997. He and Velasquez were heroin addicts, a trait which caused Bunting to dub him a waste of flesh, although it's unclear why Velasquez wasn't singled out for similar treatment. Porter was sleeping in a parked car on Bunting's property when he and Wagner attacked him. Once he was dead, his body was displayed to Velasquez, potentially as a warning, before being put into a barrel for disposal. The group's next target was Velasquez's half-brother, 21-year-old Troy Eude. Velasquez claimed Eude had repeatedly subjected him to brutal abuse during his youth, prompting Bunting to add his name to their so-called kill list. They drove over to Eude's home in the middle of the night before they bound him, threw him into his own bathtub, and tortured him relentlessly. This marked the first time Bunting brought along a video camera so he could make a record of his grisly crimes. Once the device was rolling, Bunting used pliers to crush Eude's toes and increase the intensity of the torture if his victim failed to call him God or master. Following this period of torture in which Eude was forced to reveal sensitive financial information, he was executed by strangulation. Next up was Mark Hayden's nephew, 18-year-old Frederick Robert Brooks. Bunting became fixated on the spurious idea that Brooks had been, quote, touching up young girls, and decided that something needed to happen to him. September of 1998 saw Brooks accepted into the Australian Air Force Cadets, an occasion which Bunting, Wagner, and Velasquez claimed they wished to celebrate. Brooks was tricked into showing up in an abandoned property, a so-called party house, but all that awaited him was humiliation, torture, and death. The three men shoved lit cigarettes into his ears and his nostrils, and a lit sparkler was inserted into his urethra. A syringe was used to inject bleach into his testicles, which was wired to a variac, sending painful electrical impulses through his body. His toes were crushed by pliers before finally he choked to death on his gag. The next target was a physically and mentally disabled man, 29-year-old Gary O'Dwyer. Having discovered that O'Dwyer received sizable monthly disability payments from the Australian government, he was targeted by Bunting and his associates, who tortured him for his financial details before strangling him to death. The group's penultimate murder was that of Mark Hayden's own wife, 37-year-old Elizabeth, who was apparently on the verge of reporting Bunting's crimes to the police. After making sure that she was home alone, she was murdered by John Bunting and Robert Wagner after they forced their way into her home. Later that day, her remains were exhibited to her husband, who merely laughed before ordering the disposal of her corpse. Ultimately, the group's final victim was James Velasquez's half-brother, 24-year-old David Johnson. Bunting despised Johnson and referred to him using homophobic slurs on account of his cleanliness and sharp appearance. On May 9th of 1999, the group tricked Johnson into driving out to the abandoned bank in Snowtown under the pretense of purchasing a cheap computer. There, he was overpowered as soon as he stepped into the building, and following his murder, Bunting and Wagner reportedly fried pieces of his flesh before eating them. For years, Bunting's crimes went completely undetected, partly because the victims were people whose disappearances did not raise immediate alarm. However, suspicions began to grow as more individuals went missing under mysterious circumstances. A break in the case when Velasquez, the youngest member of the group, confessed his involvement to the police. Being the group's only heroin addict, it's possible that he was detained following a minor legal infraction such as theft or possession of illegal substances. Then, while in custody, Withdrawal symptoms would have made him a ripe target for police pressure. His detailed account of the murders and the group's methods provided investigators with the evidence needed to unravel the full extent of the crimes. Police surveillance eventually led them to Snowtown, where the plastic disposal barrels were finally uncovered. The Snowtown murders resulted in one of the most complex and expensive legal proceedings in Australian history. Bunting and Wagner were convicted of multiple murders, then sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. James Velasquez received a reduced sentence after cooperating with authorities, but was still sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 26 years. Mark Hayden, who played a lesser role, was convicted of assisting with the disposal of bodies and received a sentence of 25 years. The trial shed light on the group's twisted dynamics, with Bunting revealed as the manipulative ringleader who exerted an almost cult-like influence over his accomplices. The court also heard harrowing testimony regarding the suffering endured by the group's victims, painting a grim picture of the killer's utter lack of empathy as well as their boundless greed. The revelation of the murders shocked the tight-knit community of Snowtown, which had previously been known for little more than its rural charm. The town's name became synonymous with the atrocities, leading some residents to push for a charge in its name to escape the stigma. While the town remains officially named Snowtown, its reputation had been indelibly linked to the crimes. But beyond Snowtown, the case promoted broader discussions in Australia about how society treats vulnerable individuals. But ultimately, the Snowtown murders are also a stark illustration of how prejudice, greed, and manipulation can combine to create a strain of near limitless malevolence. The Flannan Isles, or Seven Hunters, are an isolated chain of islands situated more than 40 miles off the Scottish mainland. These uninhabited islands, which stand proud among the unforgiving North Atlantic, are accessible only by private boat or rare tours, with their harsh weather and rugged cliffs deterring all but the hardiest of visitors. The largest of these far-flung islands is known as Eilean Mor, and is known to naturalists as being a sanctuary for seabirds such as the Atlantic puffin, the black-legged kittiwake, and the European shag. It was also the site of one of the most perplexing and haunting mysteries of the 20th century. The Flannan Isles lighthouse was constructed on Eilean Mor between the years of 1895 and 1899, with the purpose of guiding ships through the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. Designed by David Allen Stevenson and standing at 75 feet tall, the lighthouse represented a significant feat of engineering, and its construction, amidst harsh winds and unforgiving seas, could in itself be considered an immense achievement. It was first lit on December 7th of 1899, with 3 full-time lighthouse keepers being appointed: James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and a man named William Ross. However, during the winter of 1899, Mr. Ross came down with a rather debilitating illness and was temporarily replaced by a man named Donald MacArthur. The keeper's daily routine included maintaining the lighthouse, ensuring the light was operational, and logging weather conditions in addition to any notable events. They were trusted to be reliable and punctual in their routine, and for more than a year, they were. But on December 15th of the year 1900, entries in the logbook suddenly and inexplicably ceased. 3 days later, on December 18th, a steamer sailing from Philadelphia to Scotland reported that Flannan Lighthouse had gone dark. The report was not immediately acted upon due to severe weather conditions, which delayed any investigation until December 26th, when a lighthouse relief vessel could finally be dispatched to the island. Upon arrival, the crew of the relief vessel expected some kind of mechanical problem, but after making their way to the almost 100-foot-tall monolith, they found it completely abandoned. The entrance gate and the main door were closed, the beds were unmade, and the lighthouse's clock had stopped. Inside the kitchen, a meal had been laid out, but not eaten, and one set of oilskins was missing, suggesting at least one keeper had gone outside for some reason. There were no signs of struggle or violence, just an eerie silence, and the enduring question of just what in the hell happened to our 3 lighthouse keepers. One of the most widely accepted explanations is that while securing equipment on the notoriously perilous West Landing, the keepers were caught by a massive freak wave, which washed all 3 from the island in one fell swoop. Evidence which points to this include bent iron railings, a displaced rock, and scattered supplies, indicating a sudden storm of significant force struck the island, catching the keepers unprepared. Despite no such storm being recorded elsewhere, and thus casting a great deal of doubt on such a theory, weather patterns on the region can be unpredictable. It is therefore very possible a rogue wave or freak storm hit an isolated area around the lighthouse and swept the doomed lighthouse keepers from the island. Another theory suggested a violent, potentially deadly altercation between the lighthouse keepers, one that ended in a fatal accident or perhaps even murder. Donald MacArthur was known to have a volatile personality and might well have instigated some kind of physical confrontation. Additionally, the isolation of lighthouse duties can strain relationships, leading to heightened tension. Yet the lack of any signs of a scuffle or violence in the lighthouse makes this theory less plausible unless the conflict occurred outside, whereby evidence could be washed away by the sea. The isolation and history of the Flannan Isles, once a place of pagan worship, have fueled supernatural theories. Local folklore speaks of spirits or so-called fairy storms that could have whisked the men away. However, this is more folklore than fact, but has been popularized in various cultural representations like poems and songs. The Flannan Isles do indeed have a rich tapestry of myth and legend, including tales of sea monsters and ancient gods. Yet while these stories enhance the mystery's allure, they offer no plausible explanation to those grounded in logic and reason. More improbable theories include abduction by foreign agents, or the keepers choosing to escape their secluded lives in what might be called voluntary disappearances. While such theories are intriguing, they are largely unsupported by evidence and lean heavily into the realm of speculation. Though highly unlikely due to the logistics of such an operation on a remote island, the idea of abduction might entertain those who enjoy spy thrillers, but no geopolitical context or motive supports this theory. As for escape, the men have no apparent reason to abandon their posts and lives, and this comes after extensive testimony from friends and family. Another practical explanation suggests that one keeper went out to check on or secure supplies, and the others followed in an attempt to warn him against it. Then, after falling into the sea somehow, the keepers attempted to rescue their drowning comrade and were taken by the seas in turn. This theory accounts for the missing oilskins, yet it doesn't explain why all 3 went out in bad weather. Perhaps one keeper noticed something amiss with the external equipment, prompting him to exit the lighthouse, and given the camaraderie among lighthouse keepers, it's conceivable the others would follow to assist, only to be overwhelmed by unexpected weather. Britain's Northern Lighthouse Board conducted an official inquiry, concluding that in all likelihood, the keepers had likely swept away out to sea during a storm and drowned. However, the lack of concrete evidence fueled a great deal of morbid speculation among the general public. Superintendent Robert Muirhead, who claimed to have known the keepers personally, visited the lighthouse in the aftermath of their disappearance. He was among the first to conclude that it was nothing but a tragic and unforeseen accident, and while many agreed, others have accused him of organizing a cover-up. And following the incident, safety measures at lighthouses were reassessed, and this led to the introduction of better equipment, more reliable communication systems, and protocols for emergency situations that ensure that no such disappearance can reoccur in the future. The mystery has not only inspired countless stories, poems, and films, but also led to the improvements in lighthouse safety protocols, including better weather monitoring and emergency signaling systems. Theories abound, but without definitive proof, the fate of James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur continues to be a subject of intrigue and debate. Even now, more than 100 years later, the incident serves as a poignant reminder of the solitude and peril faced by those who keep watch over the sea, ensuring the safety of others at the cost of their own. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, and there are super fun live streams every Sunday and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks for members of this YouTube channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, #Team Manifesting Wieners. This story has always been at the back of my mind. I'm 23 now. Let me explain the house that we lived in. It was an upstairs downstairs. In the upstairs, there was one bedroom, long hallway to the bathroom, where I was. So I started a new job. I was 20 at the time. I was a trainee at a hairdresser's. I spent the whole day on my feet, making coffees, tea, and brushing up the hair on the floor. Doesn't seem like hard work, but the hairdressers were very busy because a bride was in with their bridesmaids trying out different hairstyles, so I had to stay a bit longer. I started at 9 and finished at 5, so after my shift, all I could think about was a nice warm bath. My legs were killing me. I lived with my boyfriend, who was out of town doing some jobs for his dad to help pay the rent. It was a fairly nice house. It belonged to his brother, who allowed us to move in. As soon as I got home, relaxed for a bit, then went upstairs, ran my bath, locked the door, and got in it. So at this point, I was drifting away in a very relaxing hot bath, but then I heard a noise on the stairs, and it startled me. I convinced myself I was being paranoid because I don't like being home alone, but then I heard it again. It was like someone was slowly sneaking up the stairs. I still lay in the bath, making sure the water didn't splash. While I was doing this, I listened, and I wasn't being paranoid. Someone was sneaking up the stairs, very slowly, step by step. I'm laying in the bath, terrified with tears running down my face. The noise had moved from the stairs to the hallway, and it was getting closer, closer until it stopped outside my bathroom door. I froze, no movement, and I even held my breath. I don't know how long this happened, but it felt like hours. I could hear breathing against the door, a light faint tap on the door. I stayed quiet and prayed that they didn't bust the door down. It must have lasted a few minutes, but it felt like forever. My fear was confirmed. Very loud feet were making their way back down the stairs, and my back door slammed open. I jumped out the bath, ran down the hall, and grabbed the phone, which we had in our bedroom, straight back to the bathroom and locked the door. I called the police. My skin was wrinkled from the water. I was shaking, crying on the phone to the operator. She told me to stay in the bathroom with the door locked until 2 police officers would come, and she would tell me when they were there. Dripping wet, with my back pressed against the bathroom door, shivering, I waited. We stayed on the phone until the police came, and they checked the back and front door, and the back door was wide open. I stayed in the bathroom until a police officer shouted up that it was safe to come out. He shouted up, and I ran down the stairs like my life depended on it. The woman officer calmed me down while I told her what had happened. She asked me, could it have been my boyfriend or anyone I knew? The answer was no. His brother moved away, my family didn't live near me anymore, and my boyfriend was out of town. He was at his dad's helping with the job. Nothing was stolen, and everything was in place except the back door was hanging wide open. They took my statement and asked me if there was anywhere that I could go, and honestly the answer was no. I was told to get a security system like an alarm. The police did a great job. I felt much better that they had checked the house, around the neighborhood, and even warned the neighbors. I couldn't get a hold of my boyfriend until he came home. I told him what happened and he was shocked, and then the neighbor had someone try to break in her house later during the night. Now I'm 23 and I no longer live in that house, but still with my boyfriend. We have a huge dog, a German Shepherd who is a guard dog, but I still fear taking baths at home alone. I have a nightlight which goes off when someone enters our garden and a security system. As for the person who did it, they were never caught. So I first met this guy last month. I was having an anxiety attack because I was about to dance with my classmates for the morning exercises in the school stage, and my school principal saw me, and then she asked the guy to accompany me to the clinic, so he did. I thanked him for accompanying me, but he didn't reply. I also asked him his name, but he didn't reply as well. He just had a blank, emotionless expression on his face. It kind of weirded me out. Now, we have met again, but this time it's in the washroom. I saw him standing near the urinals, and I said hi. He just stood there and didn't reply, and he's not doing anything, not even peeing. He had the same blank expression on his face. Then while I was in a stall doing my business, he started banging and punching on the door, and I was like, "Hey, what's the problem?" So I just stopped doing my business, got out of the stall to confront him, and he was staring at me, and this time he was giving me the evil eye, and he was clenching his fist. So I simply ignored him because I'm 100% sure he was going to hurt me physically. When I got out of the washroom, I ran back to the classroom as fast as I could and let out a sigh of relief because he didn't follow me. I didn't tell my teacher because I was so scared and creeped out. Instead, I asked the school janitors if they knew who this guy was. They said they've never seen him before anywhere in the school campus, which I found was very weird because the guy was wearing a school uniform, but not an ID. In my school, we are always required to wear the ID. I have no idea who this creepy guy was that physically threatened me in the school toilet. Maybe he's just out of his mind. So yesterday evening, I was on break at work and decided to use the restroom. For reference, I am a manager at a local restaurant in my town. I was sitting there and I heard someone else walk in. I immediately heard him talking to himself. I noticed he was possibly mentally disabled. He started mentioning demons and how he can feel them around the room. He said he could feel them more underwater. He then comes right up to my stall door. "Are you a manager?" Yes." "Have you ever heard of the Book of Spells?" He started pacing in front of the door. I said no, and he went on about the owner of the Book of Spells, and he just kept laughing harder and harder while talking and walking around the stall. He stops and says, "Okay," very calmly, and left. I immediately went back behind the counter and told the others. He left soon after. I have no idea what his plan was, and I hope I never find out what the Book of Spells is. I'm an 18-year-old female working the 4 p.m. to midnight shift at a nice and clean gas station convenience store in Canada. Because the location of my workplace is right beside a highway, it is common for people to settle in their parking lot for a while or even the entire night. What isn't common is when someone parks right outside the window beside the cash register, parallel to the building. It's about 11 p.m. and I'm preparing to close my shift, excited to go home and rest. Keep in mind, I'm only 18. I still live with my parents. A rush of customers comes and goes when I notice a car parked outside. Right beside the cash register, there is a huge window in order for the workers to look out to see the customers at the pumps. Many people have parked there before, but none have ever parked parallel to the store, snuggled up to the curb. Whatever, I thought. Maybe the man or woman is just exhausted. 11:30 rolls around and the car is still parked there. I had to go outside to shut the oil shack, which happened to be right next to where the car was parked. As I closed the shack, I looked into the car to see the driver's seat reclined all the way back with a man laying back with a smirk on his face I couldn't tell. I rushed inside and got behind the counter. Right as one of my regulars walked in, I pointed out the man in the car, joking that he was waiting for me. The regular seemed worried, telling me to call the cops. He said to stay safe, he had to go back to work. I decided against calling the cops because the guy could have easily just been resting after a long haul. At around 11:45, I decided to call my sister because the guy was still outside. He lived about 15 minutes away from my workplace, a perfect amount of time for her to get there in time for closing. I told her the lowdown, which she responded that she was leaving at that moment and would be there soon. 11:48, the guy gets out of the car. Oh crap. I'm closing in less than 10 minutes and now he decides he wants a snack. As I watch him, I notice he is walking around near the pumps, staring off into the sky, later to assume he was looking for the cameras. 11:50 and he walks into the store, not returning my greeting. He walks right towards the bathrooms. A couple of customers walk in, and because I was busy with them, I assume the man may have walked out without me knowing. 12:01 and my sister shows up. Thank God. But the car was still parked outside. She comes in and asks what's up, and I ask if he's in the car. She replies no, and that's when my heartbeat increased. I looked at the bathroom doors where both signs, there's 2 bathrooms, one men and one women. When vacant, the little sign will be green. When occupied and locked, the sign will be red. And they were both green. When the bathroom lights are on, you can see the glow from underneath the doorway. The lack of glow made me assume that there was no one in either, because the lights are motion censored. I told my sister that there was no one in the bathrooms, so I began locking the doors and shutting off the lights. My sister, with her balls of steel, opened the women's bathroom. And who was sitting on the toilet? She closed the door and began yelling at him that the store was closing. A couple of minutes pass and he's still in there, so she pounds on the door a little bit more. It's about 12:08 and now the creep comes out of the bathroom, grabs a cookie, buys it, and walks out. He never even looked at me in the eye or spoke. He got into his car right away and hurried off. I finished locking up and met my sister at a Tim Hortons nearby. Had my sister not been there, I'm unsure what could have been the outcome. I could easily not be typing this right now. Thankfully, that day at the beginning of my shift, I put in my 2 weeks' notice. I had to work the next night, which was uneventful, yet I was still on edge to even go outside. After telling my parents, my mom being the Criminal Minds fan, they thought that the man may have scanned the property for cameras and went into the bathroom to wait for me to check them during the closing process of the store. He may have parked parallel for a quick getaway. So glad I'm done working there. I live in a house compound, and one day me and my family were visiting a friend's house. After a couple of hours, my mom and my friend's mom asked us to go fetch something from my house. So we go back to my home, which is a long way from his, and the walk seemed uncomfortably long and creepy and had an eerie atmosphere for some reason. After ages of walking, we reach my house and we get the thing they needed, which was inside the house. So I unlocked the door and got the object, and I noticed the bathroom door was lit and the exhaust fan was on, which we usually turn off unless someone is using the toilet. But I didn't give that any attention and thought my dad was using the toilet since he wasn't in my friend's house when we left. So me and my buddy decided to wait outside the house for my dad to finish, and I occasionally went to the small window outside the bathroom and called for my dad, but I didn't get an answer. But I heard someone humming and singing, so I thought that he was having a good time. After a good half an hour passed, I started feeling uneasy and told my friend we had to leave because our parents are probably angry now. When we arrived at his house, we were shocked to see my dad sitting and talking to my friend's parents. We asked him, "Where were you?" And he said, "I didn't go anywhere. I just stayed here since we first came." This made me scared because my family had been here for 3 hours, and we just waited for my dad for 1 hour. I go ask my sister the same question and get the same response. Someone was surely in my bathroom. After the visit is done, we go back home just to find the front door, which I locked and unlocked, and the bathroom door was wide open. My family acted normally, but I was completely freaking out, and I couldn't get any sleep that night. I went to college in Flint, Michigan back in the early 2000s. One day I was waiting for an evening class and eating food in the cafeteria area. The whole area was mostly deserted at this time of day. I went into the ladies' room to go to the bathroom before walking to class. I remember hearing a noise and glancing down at the floor of the stalls to see if anyone else was there. I didn't see any feet. I went to the bathroom, washed my hands, and left. As I was coming out of the bathroom, I saw a campus police officer at the end of the hall. He started running toward me and yelled, "Put your hands up!" Terrified, I did so, unsure of what I could have possibly have done wrong, and was confused when the cop ran right by me. I turned around and watched as he pulled a guy behind me to the ground and cuffed him. I heard the cop say, "What were you doing in the women's bathroom?" So this guy was hiding in one of the stalls and followed me out. The cop didn't say anything to me, and I just left and called my mom to tell her what happened. To this day, it feels so surreal that I asked my mom about it if I actually called her and told her because I wonder if I dreamed it. She confirms that I did call her right after it happened to tell her. It was super creepy. This just happened to me a few nights ago and I am still shaken up, so bear with me. I am a female bartender at a small cafe that doubles as a venue. During the day we serve coffee and lunch, and at night we have a full bar with bands and comedy shows. On this night, it was an open mic comedy show. Not a lot of comedians showed up, so we ended up closing up shop early and I was ready to go home. I had a patron come in and order a single beer during the comedy show. He was acting nervous, but being a female bartender, I get male customers that are shy or don't want to talk to women, so I didn't think much about it. He sat down, sipped his beer, and watched the show. Since we closed early, everyone was pretty much gone, and I wanted to lock up and clean so I could get home. After I escorted the last couple out of the bar and got ready to lock the door, I see the man from earlier walk down the back hallway and into the men's restroom. Not even a minute later, he burst through the door yelling, "Hurry! Come back here, I need help!" I stood at the opposite end of the hallway and asked him what was wrong. The toilet is overflowing. There's water all over the floor. Help me. Help me clean this up." I could tell that something was wrong, and I replied, "It's okay, man. It happens. I'll mop it up. I'm just trying to close up right now." He continued to argue with me, trying to get me to come in the bathroom with him as I stood about 20 feet away down the hallway. Finally, he walks towards me very aggressively and tries to grab my arm. "You need to come back here now," he says. I immediately put my hands out in front of me so he can't come any closer, and I tell him he has to leave. He walks outside and I lock the door behind him. I check the bathroom and it is completely spotless, no water on the floor at all. I flush the toilet and urinal and they are both working fine. I start to get nervous and I take my large pocket knife and clip it to the waistband of my pants, just in case. As I'm cleaning our espresso machine and putting toppers on the liquor bottles, I hear a tapping noise. I look up at the front of the store, which is one big window that has a few curtains covering it. The same man is tapping on the window, waving at me and laughing like a maniac. I watch him walk over to the door and pull on it. It doesn't open since I had locked it after he left. He starts screaming and pounding on the glass, saying to open the door. "I'm going to kill you." Fight overcame flight at this point, and I walked around the counter and about 6 feet from the door. I pulled out my knife and locked eyes with him and yelled, "I'm calling the cops. Get out of here." He smiled and walked out of the view of the window. At this point, all of my adrenaline just crashed. I locked myself in the office and called 911 crying, explaining I'm alone and a man tried to lure me into the bathroom and was outside trying to get into my bar. I waited an hour and a half and no police showed up. I called my boyfriend and he drove up to the shop. My manager watched the security cameras from home, making sure that the man didn't come back. I did the deposit and immediately drove home, my boyfriend following close behind. My male busboy has been coming into work with me so I'm not alone, and the managers have been keeping an eye on the security cameras while I'm working. So to the crazy dude who tried to lure me into the bathroom to do God knows what to me, I hope I never see him again. This story takes place in late April of my freshman year of college. My school is situated in the western mountains of my state, and as the school year was coming to a close, I was focusing on packing up all of my belongings. At the time, I didn't have a place to park my car in my town, and my parents' house was 3.5 hours away on the other side of the state, so my only option to get home was the Greyhound. I had acquired quite a lot of crap during the school year, sorority gifts, clothes, blah blah blah, and decided to go home for the weekend to take some of it early so that on move-out day, the rest would easily fit on my mom's Honda Civic. The bus was usually a pretty sweet gig. With your student ID, it was $10 round trip, express, and I'd taken it a few times before, so I felt pretty comfortable. The only snafu was that the last stop for this particular bus was in Greensboro, and because I lived an hour and a half east from there, I'd always have to get a connecting bus to Durham, where my mom would pick me up. Well, Durham's pretty seedy. The bus to Durham was pretty seedy. I hated sitting around waiting for my mom, and she hated me waiting there, so we decided that this time she'd drive to Greensboro after work and pick me up. And this is where the story begins. The bus station was an add-on to a much older Amtrak station. I decided to sit in the train station side while I waited because it had this beautiful antebellum charm that spoke to my art student's soul more than the sterile Greyhound terminal. Not to mention there wasn't anyone else in there, which meant I had more room to spread out my bags and myself. It was about 3 p.m., and my mom wasn't going to be there for what would coincidentally turn into one of the longest hours of my life. I had been scrolling through Facebook on my phone when I noticed a form moving in my peripheral vision. I looked up, and there was a man standing over me. I'm sorry, what was that? I pulled one of my earbuds out to look at him. I instantly felt uneasy. He was over 6 feet tall, easily 250 pounds, and something in his mannerisms wasn't quite right. I asked how you're doing today, honey. His mouth curled into a smile, but something in his eyes betrayed the innocence of the gesture. My eyes darted around, and I noticed that aside from this man, I was still the only other person in the terminal. I smiled back hesitantly and exchanged pleasantries with him, hoping that if I kept my answers short, he'd move along quicker. Quite the contrary. He sat down very close to me, like thigh to thigh close to me. He kept asking me questions about myself, which I felt obligated to answer out of politeness. Now, before I get an onslaught of comments telling me you should have told him to screw off or you're not obligated to be nice to anyone, I would like to point out a few things. He was easily twice my size. Like most women, I was raised to be polite to everyone, and whether it was from drugs or mental instability, this man had a look in his eyes that said, "You are prey." "You look like a good girl. Are you?" His comment had come out of the blue and made my stomach lurch. "Excuse me?" I squeaked out. His dark eyes were burning into me, his expression deadpan. "You a virgin?" My mouth went dry. I felt incredibly embarrassed, uncomfortable, and couldn't quite find my words, so I nodded. His face relaxed like he was relieved, and that not-quite smile settled back on his face. "I knew you were a good girl. I just had to ask because you're thick, you know. Men love thick women." His hand moved to my upper thigh, and my heart was racing. "They'd do anything for a thick woman like you." I hate myself for it, but my innate reaction to literally everything is to laugh nervously, which he mistook for an invitation to keep making advances. I had contemplated just grabbing my bags and running for it, but where was I going to run? The station was a ghost town, and to get to the Greyhound terminal, I'd have to walk through a poorly lit hallway where the bathrooms were, and I surmised he could easily just corner me there. I shifted in my seat, and his hand fell from my thigh. At this point, I heard a door open and saw another man walk in and sit facing me from the next aisle of pews. My eyes silently pleaded with him to help me, but he ignored me and said hi to the man next to me. They had a brief conversation before the intercom called for his bus, and he left. "God, that's my boy Nate," he said with a laugh. "I love him, but he's one of them guys I'm talking about. He'd do anything for a taste. You're so sweet. Even I could take you back in that bathroom, and nobody would even notice." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I looked down when I felt my phone vibrate in my clammy palm. It was my roommate texting me. Abby's text was just a stupid screen-capped meme, but it gave me an idea. I texted her back 2 words. Call me. That your boyfriend? I looked over at him, surprised by the aggressive undertone of the question. In retrospect, I should have probably said yes, but I had just gotten out of a really abusive relationship and the thought of boyfriends disgusted me, so I denied it. It's my mom. She's on her way back to pick me up now. No boyfriend? Are you serious? I can't believe that, he said, shaking his head. Can I get your number? I scrambled to come up with an excuse. I weakly told him I don't give it out to people I don't know, but he ignored me. I could check up on you. Make sure you're being good and all. His eyes twinkled something sinister, and I could tell he was irritated at my reluctance. Abby had texted me back asking why she needed to call, which I replied, now. I denied his offer again, and before he could push the subject further, my phone rang. I jumped up immediately and emphatically answered, Oh, hey Mom, what's that? You're here? Uh-huh. Okay, I'll be right away. No, stay on the line in case I can't find you. Throughout my talking, Abby was on the other line asking what I was going on about. Oh yeah, Mom, the bus ride was fine. I'll tell you about it when I get in the car. I emphasized the last part, and I think it finally registered with her that something was wrong. I slung my duffel bag over my shoulder, and I will never forget what happened next. I went to grab the handle from my suitcase, and simultaneously, the man's hand shot out and grabbed onto it first. I let my eyes slowly travel from his hand up to his face and froze when our eyes locked. I have never seen so much animosity in my life. Slowly he smiled again, an unnatural, forced kind of smile, and said, See you soon. I ripped the bag out of his hand and hightailed it out of there. I waited outside out of view of the train station and told Abby everything. My mom showed up shortly after, and I all but jumped inside the car. I tried to explain what had me so rattled, but she told me I was probably overthinking it, and that he was probably homeless and mentally ill and didn't know any better. Typical mom. Regardless, I never took the bus home again, and I can only imagine what would have happened if he had gotten me in that bathroom. I'm a 15-year-old girl, and I really enjoy listening to these kinds of stories. Well, I did, before this happened. I also suffer from a mild case of insomnia and am often left alone at night. It was a typical Wednesday night. I was the only one awake in the house. My parents and brother have gone to bed long before this happened. It was almost 3 a.m. and I decided I should go to bed. Normally, I would just shut down my computer, turn off my light, and then go to bed. But I was on my period and had to brush my teeth anyways. I took my computer with me and left my bedroom light on before heading to the bathroom. The bathroom is across from my bedroom, and in between the two is my brother's room, our shared laundry basket, the main entrance and front door, and a small window that started about mid-thigh level. I'm 5'8", and went all the way up to the ceiling. I turn on the hallway light because I'm always worried that I'm going to trip over the laundry basket and wake up my brother if he heard the sound of my body crashing on the floor. I got to the bathroom, did my business, and just as I finished washing my hands, I heard a small click sound come from out in the hallway. I froze. It sounded like the hallway light was being switched off, and I was the only one awake. I hadn't heard anything other than the one small click, so I know it's not my brother because not only would he have yelled at me through the door, but also because his bedroom door gives a very distinct sound when it's opened, and his door just naturally closed unless propped open, which it wasn't when I walked by. I didn't move. I couldn't. I waited and listened for any other sound, any sign of movement. I heard nothing, so I risked moving and pressed my ear to the door. Still, I heard nothing. I tried to rationalize it as my mom having woken up and seen the light from her bedroom and came and turned it off. I eventually calmed myself down enough to open the door. Much to my relief, the hallway light was still on. I told myself that I must have imagined it. I flipped off the bathroom light and hadn't even had the chance to step off the bathroom tills when I heard small but firm taps on the hallway window. My heart leaped into my throat and my whole body turned cold as I looked toward the window. There stood a man who was outrageously tall as he was hunched over just to fit into view. If you've ever played the RPG The Crooked Man, he looked just like the monster from the game. He also had the most unsettling smile on his face that said, "I can get to you if I want." We stared at each other for a while. It felt like hours before he lifted his hand to his mouth and made the shh motion and then pointed to the front door. I chanced a small glance at it and the deadbolt was unlocked. That must have been the small click I heard. My dad always made sure the lock and deadbolt are secure before he goes to bed. My heart must have blocked my screams because I couldn't get any out. I was so scared. I looked back at the man. He laughed a laugh that sounded like a manly witch cackle and then left, triggering the motion sensor lights in the driveway. That's when I realized just how long he had been standing out there because it takes a very long time for them to turn off once they had been activated. I finally found my voice and screamed at the top of my lungs. I ran in my parents' room and they were staring at me with wide, confused, slightly angry eyes. I tried to tell them what happened, but I couldn't get anything out through my sobs. They must have put two and two together. My dad jumped up and ran off to my room, probably thinking that someone was in there, and my mom called the police. I don't know how long it took the police to get to my house, but it felt like an incredibly long time. I gave the police my statement. They hadn't found him yet, and it's been weeks. I have a large half-circle window in my room that can't be covered efficiently. I keep thinking that he's out there, watching me. My dad checks for me every night before bed, but he hasn't found anything yet. But I dread the day that he does. I'm a 23-year-old male in Florida, fairly introverted, hardly ever get out of the house. This encounter happened a few months ago. It was about 12 a.m. and I was getting a bit stir-crazy and needed to get out and just chill with someone. So I texted a special lady friend of mine. We made plans to do our normal routine of hanging out at this nice secluded park. I went and picked her up, we drove to our spot, and spent a couple of hours just chatting about anything and everything. Then she got hungry, so we decided to hop in the car and drive down the road a bit to McDonald's. Hooray for 24/7 fast food. This is where things started getting weird. We arrived at McDonald's and went inside instead of the drive-thru. We ordered her food while I went to the restroom to wash my hands. I'm a bit of a neat freak. I really wish I hadn't gone to the restroom that night. As soon as I walked into the restroom, I saw this guy standing at one of those heater-dryer things. Alright, not too weird. But then I noticed that he was kind of hunched over it and wasn't moving. Whatever, I ignore him. I wash my hands and realize that he's standing at the only dryer in the place. The paper towels are also empty, so I awkwardly try to ask the guy if he was done using the dryer. He didn't respond. Thoroughly creeped out, I just walk out and dry my hands on my shirt. I get out of the restroom and find my friend, and we sit down at the table to eat. Maybe 20 minutes go by, and we're headed back out to the car to go back to our spot. Well, my friend had to use the restroom, so I figured I might as well also. I mean, surely that guy has to be gone by now, right? Wrong. That guy was still standing at the dryer, mumbling something to himself now. I go into a stall and take a leak and can hear him hitting the button on the dryer over and over again. I wash my hands again and don't even attempt to get to the dryer. But then the guy moves as I'm trying to walk past him. He steps back right in my path and just looks at me. I notice he's around my age. He just stares at me and says, "Excuse me." Okay. I put my head down, quickly say, pardon me, and rush around him to get out of the bathroom. 30 seconds later, as I'm waiting for my friend to get out of the ladies' room, the guy walks out. He just sits down at the table near me and is just staring straight at me. My friend walks out and notices the creep just eyeballing me. She jokingly asks, "Make a new friend in there?" I just shake my head at her and try to lead her out to the car without making it obvious I'm wanting to run from the guy. Then he does the weirdest thing. He just starts cackling, like a madman. I mean, straight up Joker laugh. I'm thinking to myself, oh crap, crazy druggy dude is going to do something bad. Then he just stops suddenly, looks down at my feet and says, "Nice shoes. Osiris?" Osiris is a brand of shoe, by the way. I manage to utter, thanks, and quickly walk away out to the car. As my friend and I are getting into the car, we notice the guy staring at me from inside McDonald's, just straight eyeballing me, a death stare. Then he stands up and starts booking it towards us. He wasn't running, but he was like speed walking. He bursts through both doors of McDonald's and starts coming right at us, and now he looks angry. I pulled out of the parking lot so fast, it's a good thing the roads were empty. My friend and I went back to our spot and hung out some more. Every car that we saw in the distance, I kept freaking out, expecting it to be the weird guy following us. My friend just teased me about it the entire night, and still teases me about it to this day, about how I made friends with a creeper in the bathroom who liked my shoes. Hey friends, thanks for listening. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community. Be sure to check out my Choose Your Own Path horror game on the iOS and Android App Store, and grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon. I really am not a people person. I've had more jobs than I can count on two hands at this point, and I have yet to find one that suits me. Someone in my position with no college education and no real-world skills really struggles to find and then keep a job. Every customer service job I've had has ended in a very ugly fashion. One time, a couple of years ago, I was even arrested and escorted off the property of the store that I worked at because I may have accidentally threatened a customer. In my defense, he called me something he shouldn't have, and I may have said some things. That was a long time ago, though, and I'd like to tell you that I'd changed, but sadly, I'm still the same old me. Closing in on 30 years old in a few months, and I decided I need to do something with my life. And that led me ultimately to the best decision I had ever made in a long time, and that's going back to school. I'm studying computer science online, and I'm loving it. What I love most about it, though, is that my human contact is limited. What I realized quickly is that school was outrageously expensive, and I was just about out of money. As a result of my record and previous employment history, I was really struggling this time around to find a job. Finally, I found a pizza place near my house that was hiring a delivery driver. I figured since human interaction would be limited, what could go wrong? Clearly, quite a bit, as it seems. The first few weeks were fine. I delivered a lot of pizzas and barely said 2 words to any of the folks who ordered them. A huge amount of people actually requested for me to just leave the pizza at the doorstep, which was even more ideal. But then I met Deanna. Oh, sweet Deanna. Apparently, the people at the shop knew this woman, and she was a terror, I guess. She would always order the pizza with this weird special instructions that honestly made no sense. If anybody has ever worked in a service job, you know what I mean when people ask for the stupidest things. My supervisor that night, who happened to be the owner's son, thought it would be funny to let me deliver the pizza to Deanna, considering my track record with fellow humans. I didn't know prior to delivering that I was headed for sweet Deanna's house, and I pulled into the driveway, and this frantic, middle-aged woman ran out of the house in a robe and curlers in her hair, I kid you not. She was waving her arms in the air and screaming at me, saying, "Are you insane? Get out of my driveway! That's for owners of the house only! Don't make me call the police!" I could already feel my heart pumping. Now, in a calm voice, especially for me, I said to Deanna, "Ma'am, I just have your pizza. You just want me to drop it here or what?" The woman screamed at the top of her lungs and then shouted at me again, saying, "I won't ask you again! Move your car!" Now, a few years ago, I would have probably thrown the pizza at the lady, but somehow I had the patience to get back into my car and move to the road. I got out and started my way up the driveway. I extended the pizza out, trying to hand it to her, but she stared at me like I was holding a dead body or something. Annoyed, I said, "You gonna take your pizza?" Deanna stared at me. Her mouth was half open and her eyes looked enraged. In an instant, her eyes bulged open and she said, "This is all wrong. This is wrong. How dare you?" I was beyond confused at this point. I basically was done with this and said whatever. I set the pizza down gently in the driveway and started walking back to my car. I'm a big guy and this was a smaller woman, so I was shocked when the next thing I know, the woman jumped on my back and started to beat on the back of my head like some type of drum. While she was hitting me, she continued to yell, "It's all wrong! It's not even the right box!" I couldn't even begin to understand what she was talking about. Was she mad that the pizza was in a different box? I finally was able to gently lift her off of me and set her down. I was annoyed and increasingly angry, but the last thing I wanted to do was hurt this poor woman accidentally. I got to my car, and when I looked up, the woman was running at my car with a knife in her hand. And that was the final straw for me. I peeled off and looked in my rearview mirror to see her standing at the end of the driveway, waving the knife in the air like it was a flag or something. I didn't call the cops, and trust me, I know that that was stupid, considering this woman legitimately threatened me. But I was scared to get in trouble. I've had a lot of issues in the past with the law, and 9 times out of 10, I'm the one to blame. I just feared that in case the system failed, I didn't want to jeopardize the only good thing I have going on in my life, and that's school, and sort of this job. I didn't tell the guys at the shop exactly what happened, I just told them to never ever make me deliver there again. The more time that passes, the more I'm thankful to be alive. I have no idea where she pulled the knife from. This woman was hanging on my back and I couldn't see her at one point. If she had decided to pull that out then, I may not be writing this today. Life is weird, my friends, and crazy stuff happens all the time, especially when you least expect it. When you really break it down, the thought of someone delivering you food is objectively an unnerving thing. Now think about it for 1 second. A complete stranger is preparing your food, another complete stranger is driving to your location, and then you have an interaction with this stranger who is standing 1 foot away from you. What's even more unnerving is when this happens, and you didn't even order food. About 5 years ago, I was dog sitting for my old roommate. I didn't mind at all since I figured I would just stay at his house. I lived there for 2 years, so I didn't feel strange or anything like that, and he had the dog when I used to live there, so I already had a great relationship with the pup. In my mind, this was going to be an easy endeavor. His dog was basically the easiest dog in the world to take care of. I swear that she was part cat or something. You could fill up her food bowl once and she would eat it throughout the day. Most dogs I've seen just go nuts when their bowl gets filled, but not this pup. She never barked and she went out twice a day and did her business. At that point in my life, I was also just really looking for some space and time alone since I was nearing the end of a long-term relationship. I figured the space is just what I needed for a few days to clear my head. His house was beautiful. He had a finished basement with a cartoonishly large fireplace next to a massive TV. I figured I would post up down there for the few days that I was watching the house. My job was boring at the time and it could be done from my computer at home. So I set up my laptop, grabbed some snacks, and basically lived in the basement for a few days with the pup. On Friday night, I was feeling a little lonely since I had been there since Wednesday and I hadn't left the house yet or really seen anybody. I called a couple of buddies over to watch some college basketball and just hang out for the night. We ordered pizza and wings at around 7:30 p.m. and it was delicious. However, this is not where my unfortunate story takes place. My friends left at around midnight and I cleaned up a bit and then decided to get ready for bed. Once I lay on the couch, I ended up pulling up my laptop and starting some work just because I wasn't really tired yet. A little after 1 a.m., I thought I heard the doorbell through my headphones. I put my headphones down and sat still for a moment with my heart beginning to race. When nearly a minute went by and I heard nothing, I felt much better. I figured that it must have been a noise or something in the music that I was listening to that sounded like a doorbell. But then, I heard it again, clear as day, a doorbell. Now being in the basement, I had the slight advantage of seeing the driveway. The window sat just above my head, but if I stood on the tip of my toes, I could see the driveway. So to my surprise, more than my horror, there was a car running in the driveway with the headlights beaming. I couldn't tell what type of car it was from where I was standing because of the bright headlights. My first thought was one of my friends that were there earlier had come back. I thought that maybe they forgot their phone or something and that's why they showed up. I went upstairs and approached the door cautiously. I had all the lights off upstairs and only had the outdoor light above the front door on. As I got closer to the door, I couldn't make out the details of the person on the doorstep. They seemed to have a hood on, and then another brown jacket over the hood. When I got to the door, I cracked it open. Thankfully, there was another screen door in front of that door that was also locked. "Can I help you with something?" I said with some reluctance in my voice. The person grabbed the handle on the screen door and noticed it was locked and took a slight step back. At that moment, I didn't even look at that as alarming. It just happened so quickly that I figured it was an instinct to open the door on his part. He made a small grunting noise, I guess, and then said in an almost shy voice, "Hey, I got your small pizza and wings." He then held up a brown paper bag that was rolled up at the top. I was still trying to make out the details of his face, but he kept his head down at a downward angle. In a very annoyed voice, I said, "It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I didn't order a pizza." The guy looked around nervously and then back at me and said, Yeah, you did. This is the address I have the order for." Then he continued to repeat the address back to me, which was in fact the address of the house that I was staying at. But I slammed the door in the guy's face and shouted, "Well, you guys got the wrong address. Good night." I made my way back to the basement, and I was incredibly annoyed at this point. Just as I sat down on the couch, the doorbell rang again. I went back to the window and saw that the guy's car was still there. Thankfully, the dog slept through all this doorbell nonsense, so I didn't have to deal with a barking dog in addition to everything else going on. I called my friends and asked if they had played some joke on me since I was going to be home alone in the house. And all my friends that were over were already home and in bed. It's also worth noting my friends are not the type of people to really pull jokes like that, especially one as elaborate as this. Then I tried calling the pizza shop that we ordered from earlier. Maybe something weird happened in the system and they accidentally put down my address for another order, but when I looked up the number online, they had closed at 10 p.m., so it wasn't that pizza shop. It had only been around 2 minutes since I looked out the window, but the car was still there, and then the doorbell rang one last time. I contemplated going upstairs again, but I noticed the delivery guy was finally walking back to his car. The relief didn't last long, though. He got into the car, turned it off, and then just sat in it. He didn't leave, and he appeared to be on the phone. I was hoping that maybe he really was a pizza guy and they just had the wrong address and he was talking to his boss or something. Now call me crazy, but I don't think I ever met a delivery guy that was this persistent. I tried to make out the license plate number, but the number was faded out a bit. I know it just started with JC, but that's all I could see. Finally, he backed out of the driveway and drove off. I was slightly concerned, though, because he drove off very slowly and didn't turn on his lights. He just sort of rolled away in the car. I figured this uncomfortable ordeal was finally over and I was not in the mindset to work anymore, so I figured that I would finally try and just sleep. I turned off the TV and sat listening to some music in front of a low-lit fire. In between songs, I thought I heard a car engine. I got off the couch and looked out the window, and there was the same car again, this time parked in front of the house with no headlights. I snuck upstairs to the owner's bedroom to see if I could get a better look. I'm not sure if he noticed me, but then he drove off again. I hid behind the curtain and looked out the window for the next half hour, and the car kept driving by every few minutes. I was scared at this point because I knew something just wasn't right. I grabbed the dog and my laptop and locked the bedroom door upstairs. I was paranoid, but I felt safer doing this. Shortly after 2:30 a.m., the doorbell rang again. I looked out the window and saw no car this time. Then I heard a bunch of knocks at the door, and then that same voice from earlier loudly said, Your pizza. I have your delivery, sir. Your food's getting cold." I sat quietly and didn't do or say anything. I should have called the police right there and then, or at least told the guy that I was calling the cops. But it wasn't my house, and I had never called the police before, so I was just not thinking straight. Then the knock stopped. I didn't hear the voice anymore, and I didn't see the car. It was as quiet as could be, and I sat and stared at the ceiling all night until the sun came up. I fed the dog and let her out in the backyard quickly. I looked around for a few minutes that we were outside and then ran back into the house. I made sure she was okay, and then I decided I was going to leave. He was going to be back later that night from his trip, and I didn't want to stay in that house for another minute. When I left, I nearly tripped walking out the front door. A rolled-up paper bag was on the front steps. I opened it, and it just had an empty container that you put wings in sitting at the bottom of the bag. I felt sick as the thoughts flooded into my head, thinking about everything that could have happened. I drove away, and as I got to the end of the street, I saw what I thought may have been the car from the previous night. It was a dark sedan with a license plate that started with JC. I called the owner of the house right away, and he didn't seem too concerned at all, so we just kind of discussed it for a little while, and I left it at that. Nothing ever happened again regarding that incident. I asked my friend countless times if anyone had ever showed up to his house since that night, and he said never once has he ever experienced anything like that. I have no idea what happened, or what kind of danger I was truly in. It was the most uncomfortable and frightening night of my life. I know it may be irrational, but I have yet to order pizza or any other kind of food since. A few years ago, I was able to open an awesome pizza shop with my brother. The business was great, and we worked well together. My brother and I cooked the pizza and wings, and our wives took the orders and operated the cash register. We would usually hire college kids to deliver the food for us, and we could focus on the pizza and running the shop. We had a lot of turnover with the delivery drivers because it's not a glamorous job. Where I live, we get a lot of snow, and nobody wants to drive and deliver pizzas in the snow. On top of the tips, I paid my drivers well, more than any other pizza place would pay a driver. My only condition was, please tell me when you're going to quit so I can make arrangements. Now this worked for a while and honestly still works today. The only thing I was not prepared for, though, was my driver calling in for a shift. It was a Saturday night, and it was busy, of course. My brother was out of work for a month for some minor surgery that he had had, so I was insanely busy. My driver called in and said that he was sick, which I can't really question. I was able to get a friend to come in and help me, but he didn't have a license, so I had to deliver the pizzas while he cooked, and my wife answered the phones. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, stressful of course, but smooth. I was making my last run of deliveries for the evening when I pulled up to a house that was having a loud party. I walked up to the door with the 3 pizzas, and 2 young ladies answered the door. It was clear that they were college girls, and they definitely had a little too much to drink, but it's a college town and I'm not one to judge. I gave them the pizzas, and as she was trying to pull money out to tip me, I saw my delivery driver that called in standing in the room behind the girl. Without thinking, I shouted, "David, what are you doing?" He turned around and saw me, and then just ran, as if I was going to chase him or something. No, I was angry, but I wasn't so mad that I was going to chase the poor kid. The 2 girls looked confused, and I made a joke and told the girls that if they see David, give him a nice kick for me. I was mad at the situation, but I understand. As I said, it's a college town, and I know these kids just want to hang out and have a good time. I probably would have busted his chops about it, but I wouldn't have been that mad. I'm just not that kind of boss. And that night, I told my wife about seeing David, and she just had the same reaction as me. She called him some ridiculous name I can't remember, and we kind of just shared a laugh about the situation. We had a couple of drinks to cap off the night and then got into bed at around 1 a.m. I hadn't fallen completely asleep yet when I thought I heard a noise from outside the window. We live in a 1-story ranch house, so you could be standing right outside my bedroom window. It sounded like something bumping and tapping the window. I woke up to my wife and asked if she heard it as well, and she did. After a brief deliberation, she told me to move to the curtain and see if someone was there. My logical brain told me that there wasn't, but something did feel wrong. I whipped back the curtain, and to my relief, there was nothing there. I thought I could make out the smudge of some sort of fingerprints on the glass, but I was sure that it was my mind playing tricks on me. We both rolled over to go back to sleep, but I wanted a drink of water before bed. I made my way to the kitchen, and that's when I saw someone trying to break into the sliding glass door in my kitchen. I immediately jumped to the side in hopes that the darkness would shade me. My phone was next to the bed, so I couldn't call the police, and I was too scared to move. You can't even imagine how scary it is to see a figure actively trying to open your door in the middle of the night. I have chills now just writing this and reliving that memory. I finally worked up the courage to run back into the bedroom, and I called the police right away. My wife jumped right up, and I told her to hide in the closet. I grabbed my left-handed driver from the golf bag and slowly made my way down the hall again. The figure was now trying to open the window above the sink, and he was succeeding. The window was small, but it was budging, unlike all the other windows and doors. Once he got the windows open almost all the way, he looked up, and we made eye contact for the first time. It was my delivery driver, David. I gasped his name and stared in disbelief as the kid stared at me from the window above my sink. He turned white as a ghost, and instead of continuing to try and climb through the window, he just jumped back and ran away. I stupidly tried to call him, but his phone was going right to voicemail. The cops showed up several minutes later, and I decided on something that most people probably would not have. I did not give the cops David's name. I told them I saw an intruder breaking in, and he ran when he saw me. I gave a statement, and they left. I never saw David again. He never showed up at the shop, and he never showed back up at my house. Maybe once he realized the cops weren't coming after him, he figured I didn't report him. Or maybe he had too much to drink that night and he wasn't thinking straight. Either way, kids make mistakes, and I just hope wherever David is today, he's doing all right. At the time, I didn't have any children yet, because if I did, that ending may have played out a little differently. I have no idea what David intended on doing that night, whether he just wanted to rob my house or actually cause us harm. I'm thankful that he found some sense in that moment and actually ran away. I know we caught him out that night with his friends, and he was just kind of faded, I guess, from drinking, but I really held no ill will towards him, so the fact that he ended up in my house and tried to break in, I don't know whether it was coincidence or he truly had some sort of ill intent. But David, if you're still out there, I sincerely hope that you're okay. This story took place about 6 to 7 years ago when I was dating my college girlfriend. We were staying at her parents' house while they were out of town for a business conference in Phoenix. She had a lot of pets that needed to be taken care of, a bunch of fish and a few guinea pigs and a rabbit. I never realized how much work some of them were, cutting up lettuce, cleaning cages, and whatever else went into the maintenance. Anyway, the night started out like any other. We were just watching TV. Actually, I think we were watching the Disney movie Heavyweights. If any of you are familiar with that movie, there is a scene where the entire camp absolutely pigs out on junk food. Once I saw the pizza, I knew that's what I wanted for dinner. Not good pizza, though. I was in the mood for Papa John's. I love their plain breadsticks and all the different sauces that come with them, and for some reason, that's what I was in the mood for. My girlfriend begrudgingly agreed, but asked if we could pick it up instead of being delivered. After I took a look outside, I told her that we should just have it delivered as the weather was getting really nasty out. It was a mixture of sleet, snow, and rain. She agreed, but asked if I would call in the order, and I didn't mind. I called in, paid with a tip included, so they could just leave it at the door. They said it would take around half an hour or 45 minutes to deliver, which seemed reasonable to me. But after an hour and a half, I was starting to get hungry. I knew the roads were wet and honestly felt kind of bad for ordering it, as her parents' house was probably a good 7 to 8 miles away from the pizza place. Just as I was beginning to give up on the fact that food would ever arrive, I saw headlights pulling up the long driveway. But as the vehicle got closer to the house, the lights stayed on with no movement. No one got in or out of the car. It was just parked there for a good 5 minutes. I opened up the door and waved them on, trying to acknowledge that this was the right place. Still, no movement as the headlights glared right at my face. Then suddenly the headlights went off, but The car wasn't moving closer to the house, it was moving further away. The car was backing up down the driveway and heading towards the road. I was both confused and increasingly hangry. I called the shop and asked for the status of the delivery and if I should cancel due to the weather. They told me that the delivery driver should have been there as they left a while ago. My girlfriend also seemed overly concerned or anxious about the whole situation. I told her it wasn't a big deal and if worse came to worse, we could just make a sandwich or something. Still, I could tell something was wrong and that her mood had suddenly shifted. I tried to brush it off and not pry, and as soon as we pressed play on the TV, we heard a huge bang at the door. It was like someone was pounding on it as hard as they could. We both jumped up, eyes darting toward the door. I told her to stay behind the couch and just let me go check. I told her that I'm sure that it was just the delivery guy leaving the food at the door. And I was right. The food was sitting on the porch, and I didn't see a sign of a person or vehicle, which I thought was peculiar. I brought the food inside and locked the door, then put it on the counter so we could start eating. When I opened the breadstick box, there was a napkin inside that looked like it had been written on with red pen. It said, "I hope you enjoy. XOXO." I showed my girlfriend and her face turned white. I asked her what was going on and why she was acting weird. She then said that one of her exes, Sean, used to work at Papa John's, or maybe still did. She didn't want to make a big deal of it as she was sure that it would be a non-issue, but she said that she thought the car that had pulled into the driveway earlier looked like his old car. At least the one that she remembered from when they were dating. But she said that he always used to leave her notes that had XOXO at the bottom. Even after they broke up, she said that he would leave them on her car. She said that when she decided to leave him, he didn't take it well and began contacting her nonstop, trying to get back together and mailing and leaving her letters. She said that after she changed her number and made her social media accounts private, she never heard from him again and never had any further issues. I really didn't know what to say. I wanted to say I'm sure this one was a big coincidence, but I didn't know if it was or wasn't. I told her that anybody that was here is now gone, as I didn't see a person or car outside. I told her that we should skip dinner and go to bed if she wanted, but she said she was fine and that we should eat. About 15 to 20 minutes after we got done eating, we heard another loud crash coming from outside. It sounded like glass or ice had been hurled against the sliding glass doors in the kitchen. Again, I told her to stay in the living room while I went to check it out. The motion sensor was activated in the backyard, but I didn't see anyone or anything. I didn't see anything that could have hit the glass. Nothing was broken that I could see. I asked if she wanted me to call the police, and she was reluctant. One of her parents would have to be notified, and she said she really didn't have any proof that someone was there. We decided to call it an early night and try to get some sleep. I knew that I wasn't going to be able to sleep much. My anxiety was definitely going to keep me up most of the night. Thankfully, the remainder of the night was uneventful. It was 3 a.m. and we hadn't heard or seen anything else. However, to this day I swear that I heard scratching and whispering from 3 a.m. on to the morning. I felt like someone was outside the window, but every time I shifted the blinds to look, nothing was there. In the morning, I chalked it up to the animals making noise, maybe to make myself believe or feel better about the situation from the night before. To my knowledge, nothing else came from the incident, and my girlfriend at the time never had another weird occurrence. We broke up a few years later, but almost every single time I order pizza, I think about that night, and I half expect there to be a note in my pizza box. Most people out there have experienced some sort of heartbreak, and everybody deals with this crisis differently and in their own way. For me, it was a pizza, and shamefully, Tinder, both of which usually left me feeling like a truck hit me. After a few, let's call them Tinder dates, I decided that I was done with Tinder, at least for a while. Things get weird and almost scary sometimes. I decided that the best way to deal with this loneliness was to order an amazing loaded French fry pizza. I'll say this, if you've never experienced the glorious bounty of a loaded French fry pizza, you need to change that immediately. I ordered my pizza, and about 45 minutes later the doorbell rang. It was a beautiful woman delivering my pizza as well. I know anybody can deliver food, but I personally have never seen a woman so gorgeous delivering pizza at that time. I made some stupid jokes when I answered the door, and she giggled. I figured it was now or never to make a move. Strike while the iron's hot, I suppose. So, I just asked if she wanted to hang out, and to my surprise, she said that when she was done with work after this delivery, that she'd love to chill. I was pumped, and perhaps more pumped than my pizza. She said she needed to go home and freshen up, and then she would head over at around 10 p.m. We exchanged numbers, and I decided that I probably should freshen up myself. 10 o'clock came, and she never showed up. I waited a bit, and then finally texted her and asked her where she was. I never received a text back until about 11:15. I was angry at this point, but as soon as she said she was coming over, I forgot how angry I was and agreed to still let her come. Before I knew it, it was midnight and she still wasn't there. I finally started listening to my brain for once, and I decided to text her and tell her not to come. She texted back and claimed that she was almost there and that she really wanted to hang out. I was upset and decided that it would probably be like all my other Tinder dates if I let her come over, so I stuck to my guns and told her that I wanted to pass out for tonight and that maybe we can hang out again in the future. She responded with a simple text that was just a laughing face emoji. A weird response, I thought, but I shrugged it off and decided to go to bed. I had no idea what time it was, but it was at some point in the middle of the night. I was awoken by my doorbell. I cautiously made my way to the door, and there was nobody there. Directly behind the front door is my living room, and in the living room is a back door that leads to my backyard. As I was staring at the front door, I thought I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned around and I swore that I saw someone running by my back door. I snuck over to that door and I thought I could hear giggles and whispers through the door. I couldn't make out any words, and I guess it could have been the wind, but it definitely sounded like voices. A few moments later, my worst fears came true. While I was sitting next to the back door, I looked up across the room at the front door, and at the door were what I believed to be 5 people. Whoever was standing in front then started to ring the doorbell repeatedly. I yelled from the other side of the room, "What do you want?" They stopped at the doorbell, and then a deep, burly voice responded, "We want to hang out. Don't you want to hang out?" I shouted back, a threat that I was going to call the police, but I had no intention of calling them if the threat worked. And then I heard a bubbly female voice shouting, "They would never get here in time." Now the panic started to take me over. I ran back to my room and grabbed my phone to call the police. The entire time I was in my room, they kept ringing my doorbell and banging on the door. I half expected them to break the door down at any point. About 5 minutes later, I could see the lights of the cop car shining through my window, and I ran back to the living room. The group of people was gone, and I let the cops inside so I could give a statement. I told them about the girl at the pizza shop and that I was sure that it was her and most likely her friends. The cops didn't seem too interested, if I'm being honest. They asked if I had seen any cars either when the woman delivered my pizza or when I had the alleged intruders, and sadly, I didn't see the car either time. They asked if I had any proof that it was this girl, and of course, I didn't. I didn't even know the girl's name. She was listed as Pizza Girl on my phone. Unfortunately, you can't charge someone based on feeling. I tried texting her that night, and she responded right away, indicating me that she was awake, and she claimed that I was insane. She could be right, and I was unfortunately just targeted by a group of freaks that night, and this poor girl was just caught in the crossfire, but I don't think so. Everything just seemed off from the beginning. She agreed to hang out with a stranger after delivering a pizza. Yes, more weird things have happened, but it does raise a red flag. Claiming she would be over at 10, and then she just kept postponing, saying that she was almost there. Then the weird laughing text, and then the intruders saying things like, "Do I want to hang out?" It just seemed weird and oddly suspicious. Nothing has ever happened since that night, but I can tell you for sure that I don't sleep well anymore, and I have yet to order any pizza since that night. I still have her number on my phone, and maybe now that I've written this story, I'll text the pizza girl and see if she wants to hang out. Click the join button to become a member today for exclusive content. Last month, The strangest and most unsettling thing happened to me while I was delivering a pizza. I started this gig delivering pizzas about 6 months ago to make some extra cash on the weekends. I'll say this, anybody looking for some extra money should consider delivering pizzas. I know it's not glamorous, but depending on where you work, you can make some decent side money. For the most part, I never really had any interesting stories about delivery. I've heard people describe all sorts of things from their experiences, everything from being invited inside to a party. There's someone I used to work with being invited inside after dropping off the pizza, and 6 months later he ended up marrying that woman. But for me, it was always the status quo until a month ago. In the area I deliver, there aren't too many apartment buildings. It's mostly residential neighborhoods and just a few business parks. However, there is a massively large apartment building within our delivery area. The apartments are new, but the building itself is quite old. In the early 1900s, the building was some sort of warehouse or factory. I think they made candles or something random like that, but it mostly had been abandoned for the last 40 years. Just recently, they renovated the entire building and made these beautiful apartments. They're open and spacious floor plans, and because the warehouse was huge, they were able to add a ton of apartments. I think the cheapest apartment in the entire building is $2,100 for one bedroom. Basically, you need to have some money to afford one of these apartments. When Saturday night came and I received a call to deliver a pizza to this building, I was pumped to see it for myself. I'd only seen photos up to this point. Ordinarily, I don't love delivering to apartments. It's not the apartment's fault, it's just sometimes it can be annoying trying to navigate which building is the correct one, especially when it's dark out. But not this time. This time, I was excited to deliver to these apartments, and selfishly, I was hoping to get a nice tip. The drive should have taken me about 10 minutes, but it ended up being almost 20 minutes due to the horrific weather. It was raining and storming so badly outside that the visibility was almost non-existent. When I arrived at the massive building, I pushed the button for the address of the pizza. They unlocked the door and I stood in the lobby-like room. There were 2 elevators, one to my left and one to my right. At the end of the room, straight across from me, was another door that led to the stairs. I don't love elevators, so I decided to take the stairs, even though it was on the 6th floor. I got to the floor and started making my way down the confusing corridors. It was like a maze on the floor. I assumed the floor was a giant square with rooms all the way around, but it had a lot of turns that honestly blew my mind. From the outside of the building, it was just a giant rectangle, but inside was like something out of an abstract painting. I was briskly walking down the hall, looking at all the numbers trying to find the address of my delivery. Then, without notice, the power went out. It was completely dark where I was standing. Of course, my cell phone was outside in the car, so I didn't have any light on me. The hallway was completely blacked out. I had no idea where I was and how far away the stairs were. It was as if I entered a fun house. I tried to use one hand to guide myself on the wall, and the other hand was firmly holding the pizza and wings. If you're afraid of the dark, then this would have been enough to do you in, but unfortunately, it gets worse. In my dwindling composure, I heard a door open slowly, and then close abruptly. It sounded close in front of me, but I literally saw nothing. If someone left their apartment, they weren't using a light to navigate. So I had thought, that was probably whoever ordered the pizza, and they were just checking to see if it was at their door. I decided to shout, "Hey, I got your pizza!" A brief silence ensued, and then a voice emerged from the darkness that had to be no more than 10 feet away and said in a low and raspy voice, "I didn't order pizza." I stayed quiet and stopped moving. I wanted to turn around and go back to the stairs, but at this point, I had already walked by a ton of doors, and I wouldn't know which one was the stairs. As I stood still, hoping that the power would turn on, the voice emerged again, this time right in front of me. I could feel the heat of the breath on my skin, and they said, "You're coming with me." Thankfully, I was holding the pizza because this person tried to grab me, but they ended up grabbing the pizza box. I threw the box, turned, and ran back the way I came. I don't know why I wasn't yelling for help. I think I was paranoid to give away my position. As I ran down the blacked-out hall, I tried every doorknob I passed until I found one that wasn't locked, and thankfully it was the stairs. The stairs had these emergency lights, so I was able to faintly see where I was going. I ran outside, got into my car, and drove back to the pizza shop in the rain. I told my boss everything, and we decided to call the police. The person who ordered the pizza called furious that their order was thrown out in the hallway, but I didn't care. I gave my statement to the police, who informed the apartment management, but as of writing this a month later, nothing has happened. I did find out that the floor I was on was also supposed to have these working emergency lights, but for some reason, they didn't operate. I'm still not sure if this was some cruel joke to play on someone in the dark, or if this strange person intended to harm me. Either way, I'm thankful my pizza box saved my life that night, and at this point, I'm just happy I have an insane delivery story I can finally share. If anything happens, I will for sure write up follow-ups, but at the moment, there is a demented man in the darkness, just waiting to strike. My mid-20s was a rough time in my life. I was fired from the job that I secured right out of college and wasn't able to afford my rent, so I moved home with my parents. I was slightly depressed, and I didn't even want to contemplate a new career choice yet. When I was only 22 years old, I was on pace to make $100K a year, and that number could only grow. And by the time I was 25, I couldn't find a job anywhere. The most unfortunate thing about my whole situation was that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that's what got me fired. The company that I worked for didn't ask questions and just let me go. To make a long and painful story short, a coworker whom I considered a mentor and a friend had gotten into some real bad and illegal stuff. He started to bring that stuff into the office where we worked. I tried talking to him, and it went nowhere, as you may expect. At one point during the day, I saw him go to the restroom, and I knew exactly what was going on. I went into the restroom to try and stop him, or at least try and communicate with him, but it didn't get very far. The company must have known that he was up to something, and they were watching him. As soon as I went into the bathroom, not 2 minutes later did the owner and security barge in and escort us both out of the building. I tried for months to plead for my job back, but it went nowhere. The cameras only picked me up whispering to him, and I must admit, it does look sketchy. When I was 25, I decided it was time to get on my feet and at least try to make something out of my life. One of my buddies from high school worked at a pizza shop in my hometown that his family owned. It wasn't glorious, but I needed money badly. Anything to make ends meet. I did this for a little while, and I was shocked at how much money I was making in tips. I always thought working at night would be better, but delivering pizza to businesses during the lunch rush always produced a substantial number of tips. One late afternoon, when I was about to call it quits for the day, I heard a minor argument coming from the front of the store where the cash register is located. I didn't really rush out there or even look at the commotion because the owner was a bit of a wild card, and it wasn't unlikely to see him go off on rude customers. I heard the man yell, "Never again," and then stormed out of the shop. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't quite place it at the time. After the angry man left, the owner walked into the kitchen where I was standing and looked at me with a smirk on his face. In his American-Italian accent, he said, "Hey, Tony, the hell do you do that guy? He don't like you one bit." And I shrugged and told him I didn't see the guy. Then he proceeded to tell me, "The guy saw you walk into the kitchen and said, 'I know the guy. He's bad, he's trouble, fire him.' I told him I wasn't going to fire you, and he said I'd never order pizza here again or something. And we laughed about it for a couple of days, and then it passed. By the following weekend, I had forgotten all about it. We got an order to deliver somewhere that was just out of our zone, but he agreed to pay extra if we could please deliver it. I, of course, didn't mind and was happy to take the massive tip. I made the 30-minute drive to a mansion on the edge of town. This place was beautiful, the type of house I always wanted to live in. I approached the massive front doors that were accompanied by 2 giant pillars. I rang the doorbell, and a voice came out from a speaker on the button, and it said in a muffled voice, "The door is open, my friend. Could you please just come in and set the pizza on the counter? I got a broken leg and I'm not moving too well." And the voice sounded familiar, but it was just muffled enough that I couldn't quite tell if I knew it for sure. Now I walked into the house, and it was far less striking on the inside. It smelled horrible in there, and it looked like it hadn't been cleaned in like years. There was trash everywhere, bottles and cans lined the floor, and ants were all over the place. It was disgusting to say the least. I walked into the kitchen and found a spot on the counter to set the pizza box. I took one more look around at the disarray of the home. As I was turning my head, I noticed a man standing in the doorway on the opposite side of the room. I barely recognized him at first, but after a second it was clear. It was my old mentor from my old job, and he didn't have a broken leg. He just stood there staring at me with one hand firmly concealed behind his back. I put my hands out in a defensive position and asked, "Hey man, you okay?" He took a half step forward and then stopped but didn't say anything. His eyes were wide and he looked like he was about to burst at the seams. I started to slowly back toward the front door, which was probably like 20 feet away from where I was standing. As I slowly walked backward, never breaking eye contact, he finally spoke and said, "It's your fault. I lost everything because of you. You turned me in." I tried to respond and tell him that I was fired too, but I couldn't find the words. He still didn't move really, other than a few small steps, and he just kept saying, "I blame you, Tony. I blame you." I couldn't stop noticing the arm behind his back was starting to shake and twitch, and I knew he had something behind his back, and I didn't want to find out what it was. I was about a foot away from the door. I grabbed the knob, turned, and ran to my car. As I sprinted out of the house, I could hear him moving much faster now, but I didn't turn to see if he was chasing me. When I got to the bottom of the driveway, I turned and saw him standing at his front door, waving at me with this wicked smile on his face. I just got back to the shop and told everyone there what happened, and we all had a laugh about it at the time. I didn't really understand just how scary and severe that incident could have been until just a little while ago when I was talking to my girlfriend about my delivery job. She said I was lucky that he didn't try and attack me, and she claims that he probably wanted to but was so messed up on something at that moment that he couldn't move very well. After talking to her and remembering that look in his eye, I remember just how dark and dead those eyes looked when he stared at me. If anybody ever picks up a job delivering pizza to make ends meet, never go inside, because you may not be as lucky as I was to escape. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. EST, and there are some super fun live streams every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday night that I think you should really join. Please join. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/letsreadofficial, or send it over email, and you might even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, the pizza man wants your crust. Glowing eyes of a crocodile peeping back at you in a dark sewer, and all the comments are just like, "Nope, kill it with fire," and all that kind of stuff. I'm talking about the kind of picture that makes your skin crawl, has you shuddering, and makes you physically recoil away from it after giving you a tangible physical sensation of disgust and My name is Aaron. I'm from New Jersey, but I've been living in New York City for the past 17 years, and I think I have a story you might be interested in featuring in one of your videos. So I don't really want to drop this guy's name because I know for a fact that this was a major low point in his life. He definitely isn't a bad guy, just a guy who reached his breaking point one day and just kind of lost it. So that being said, I prefer to keep him anonymous, so I'm just going to call him Dave. Me and Dave were familiar with each other, but not particularly close. Enough that I might, knock on his apartment to borrow a tool or a cup of sugar or whatever, and we'd say hey to each other if we happened to catch each other on the stairs. So this one day when Dave knocked on my door, and he actually seemed kind of angry. And when he accused me of talking too loudly, I just straight up was feeling confused. I hadn't been talking at all, and the only noises were me cooking dinner while I listened to a podcast on my phone. So I told him that, even showed him inside and was like, "Is this the noise you were hearing?" Obviously, it wasn't, as the walls that separate our apartments were pretty thick, something you pay a serious premium for in NYC. I knew darn well that it couldn't have been the podcast on my phone, no base to the thing at all, but I still showed him as a demonstration of good faith. He looks all confused too, thanks me, then walks back to his apartment after saying something about it probably being the people downstairs. A few days later, same thing happens, only Dave is seriously angry, not just a little peeved. He then accuses me of talking way too loud, and not only that, but talking about him behind his back. Saying all this shady stuff about him sounded like it was on the phone to another person too. Again, I told him no, that I hadn't been talking about him, and I thought that he was an okay dude and that even if I was talking about him, it wouldn't be negative. He seems satisfied enough with this, but just as he heads off to his apartment, grumbling about terrible neighbors, I ask if I can come over to his apartment to see if I can hear where the talking is coming from. He says sure, and I walk over, fully expecting to help him solve the mystery of the loud neighbors. But then, when I walk into the TV room in his apartment, it's quiet as the grave. Like you could have seriously heard a mouse fart in there. I then asked him the dreaded question, if he could still hear the people talking, and he just turns and looks at me to say, "You can't hear that?" He then puts an ear right up to the wall connecting to my apartment, nods and says, "I can still hear it coming from the wall. It has to be those downstairs neighbors. I already told them one by one and they're still taking me for a complete idiot." As you can probably guess, I put my ear to the wall and heard absolutely nothing. And that's about the point that I realized that something was going horribly wrong with Dave's mental health. I tried to suggest that to him in the most delicate way possible, in a way that would seem both respectful and concerned, but good God if he didn't just totally explode on me, saying, "You think I'm crazy? Well, F you, buddy. Get the F out of my apartment, you gaslighting mother effer," quote unquote. I legitimately thought that he was about to knock my teeth out as I edged back towards the door. He was so angry that by the time I was out in the hallway, his eyes were bulging, and there was froth literally coming from his mouth. I mean, he looked like he was about to blow a gasket or something. After he slammed the door in my face, I walked back to my apartment and started Googling what to do if your neighbor is having a mental breakdown. Turns out you can get, a crisis team to come out to visit people if they're showing signs of hurting themselves or others. But that seemed like the nuclear option at that point. Like I didn't want to have the men in white coats show up for the guy, and that seemed like such an extreme solution to something that might pass within a day or two if he just had some time to relax or whatever. It took less than 48 hours for the whole thing to blow up, and when it did, it was bad. It was the middle of the night when I woke up to the front door of my apartment getting pounded on, and before I can even ask what was going on, I hear Dave's voice like, "Open the door, you piece of trash. I told you what would happen if you talked about me again. Well, now you're dead." And he's screaming this. He hadn't told me anything. We literally hadn't spoken since the day he threw me out of his apartment. Whatever little interaction he'd had either been with someone else or it had occurred entirely inside his head. I remember rushing back to my laptop, bringing up that NYC Crisis Emergency Service website, and then feeling my stomach drop as I saw they only took calls between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. I knew if I actually called the cops, it'd probably turn out really, really bad. If they showed up and Dave rushed them, he might end up getting shot. Even getting tased and beaten would be bad enough, and I'd feel terrible about that. But then, as I looked over at my apartment door, hearing Dave screaming about how he was going to kill me while the door was literally shaking on its hinges, I realized I didn't really have any other choice. I tried one time to reason with him, told him I called 911 and if he didn't stop hammering on my door like he was, but he literally screamed back at me, "Call them. It's you who they'll take away in cuffs, you mother effer." And I swear to God, his voice sounded different. He was so detached from reality by that point that he legitimately thought that he could get me arrested for something. So when I told him I was on the phone to 911 asking for any kind of mental health assistance, he went right back to his apartment and called them himself. I know that because about 15 minutes into the call, The operator named him first and second name and told their dispatch center had just received a complaint against me, coming from a guy that sounded completely out of control. They sent the cops out that night, but Dave somehow managed to act normal enough for them to leave without arresting him for anything. They also knocked on my apartment too, though, which is how I gave them the lowdown on everything that had been happening. He didn't get any serious help until later that day when the mental health team knocked over to talk to him about his behavior. I swear to God those people were a literal godsend, and I have no idea how they did it, but they managed to just convince him into coming with them to get checked into somewhere for a few days so he could get some medication. They left his apartment door open when they were talking to him, and I was leaning my head out into the hallway to listen in on what was going on. I only have a faint idea of what was said, but as they were leaving, Dave was in tears. I told him I was sorry for having to call the cops, but that I needed to get him some help, and he was just crying like a baby saying, "I know, dude. I'm sorry too." I just shut my apartment door when they were gone, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't shed a tear too. It was just an awful thing seeing someone all broken down like that. I didn't go visit him in the hospital, and I didn't think it was my place to do something like that. Besides, he had an ex-wife and a kid who still cared about him enough to go visit, as well as a few brothers and sisters who brought him food and other home comforts. I only found out what actually happened when he came back a month later, and I went over to check on him to see if he was okay. Turns out he'd had a friend pass from cancer at home, and he'd been one of the 2 people going over to make sure that he was as comfortable as possible. Guy couldn't afford the hospital bills, as he had no savings or insurance, so this 40-something dude just had to lie in bed at home, racked with pain until his body finally just gave up and died. Dave and this other caregiver had been there at the time, and he said that he couldn't sleep for days afterwards. Not long after that, he started hearing voices in the walls, and well, the rest you guys know already. I suppose I want to make clear that this isn't just a scary thing that happened to me. There's kind of a lesson to it too. If you know of someone whose mental health appears to be suffering in some way, like seriously on a steep descent, then do not hesitate in contacting someone. I should have called that crisis team the moment it became clear that Dave was hearing things that weren't really there, but I hesitated, and that could have been a fatal mistake. Either Dave could have hurt himself, or he could have hurt me or one of our neighbors, and because I was one of the few people to notice what was going on, I think I'd have had to shoulder some of the blame for anything that occurred. I'd like to live in a world where we all take care of each other a little more, and it's not just physical health that's important. Anyways, thanks for reading, and I hope it wasn't too much of a bummer towards the end. I just wanted people to understand that Dave wasn't a bad guy at all. He'd just gone through a traumatic experience that I honestly think would drive most people crazy. I just hope people can learn from this indirectly so that if someone in their lives needs help, they can be the person that gets them the assistance they need before it's too late. So, I go to this comedy club in NYC called The Stand, and a few years back something happened that was literally anything but funny. This one week, these 2 comedians had a roast battle, which is basically just 2 guys saying a bunch of mean but funny stuff about each other in front of the audience. Generally, whoever makes the audience laugh the most wins a round, and then it's whoever has the most points out of 5 rounds is the winner. This one guy wins, by definitely a mile, and the other guy is joking about how he's going to get him back, stuff like that. They should have a rematch the next week. The club actually books it, and since it was such a good roast battle, pretty much the exact same audience and more show up for the show the following week. The way the club is set up, there's no backstage or whatever, so the comedians just sit at the bar in a little closed-off area until they're ready to do their sets, and then they literally have to walk through the crowd to get to the stage. So it looked like the guy who lost the roast battle hadn't showed up, and when this gets announced, everyone is groaning, disappointed that they weren't going to see the rematch, so instead, the winner gets invited up just to do a normal set. Then, as he's walking to the stage, some guy who had been sitting in the audience in a hoodie stands up real fast, pulls a gun from his pants, and just fires a shot at the guy, who then hits the floor hard. People freaked out. They started running for the exits, screaming and crying. Some people tackle the shooter whilst others run to see if the comedian's okay. Then as I look around, because I'm in the process of running myself, I see the comedian suddenly up on his feet, and he just looks like sorry, is the only way I can think to describe it. Then the shooter, the guy in the hoodie, has already pulled his hood down, and it's the dude who lost the roast battle. Basically, they'd come up with an idea to fake a shooting to make it look like the loser wanted some serious revenge. Only I can't think of a dumber prank to pull in a packed comedy club like that. I mean, it was like shouting fire in a crowded theater thing, you know? People could have actually died from people getting crushed, and I think we're actually lucky that it didn't go down like that. The comedian had to rush onto the stage and get on the mic to say stuff like that it was a prank, people. Everyone calm down, it's just a prank, it's not a real gun. The guy had used a fake, but was some kind of firecracker to make the noise and all that stuff. I mean, I'm not 100% sure how he did it, but it was convincing enough to scare the life out of almost everyone in the club. Both people were banned from performing there, and I think the fake shooter actually got a visit from the cops afterward for inciting a panic or something of that nature. It wasn't funny at all, obviously. It was one of the scariest things I've ever been a part of. Back in the late 70s, I was 18 years old, and I was still living with my mom and dad down in Kentucky. I'd always been different, and it was something that myself and my parents had always been aware of. But around the age of 18, I realized why I felt so different to the rest of the people in my small country town. Right around that time, most of my friends were chasing girls, and had given up on pretty much everything else except to pursue more hormonal inclinations. But me, I never had any interest in girls. I always felt more attracted to my male friends, and for the longest time I thought it was just that something was wrong with me. But then, the more liberated society became, and more people talked about queerness, the more I realized that they were actually talking about me. So instead of living a lie, I decided to face my truth and to share it with those close to me. So, in 1977, I decided to tell my mom, dad, and sister that I was gay. It did not go well. We were a conservative Christian family who lives in the Bible Belt, and not only were my parents outraged that I dared succumb to such sinful desires, but they told me that as long as I wanted to live like that I wasn't welcome in their home. So, what choice did I have other than to pack up and move somewhere that would actually accept me for who I was? That was how I decided on New York City. It took me about a month or two to properly orient myself to the gay scene here, but in the end, I started hanging out at a few different places that made me feel more and more at home. For a young gay man, New York City was like a paradise back then. Yeah, there were ignorant people, but there are ignorant people everywhere. But in NYC, most people just didn't care, were too busy to care about stuff like that, and I can't tell you how liberating it was. But over the years that followed me moving there, the paradise I'd found became more like a living hell. And to a lot of us, it was like there was some deadly phantom stalking me and my friends, a demon that stalked us, found us, and killed us, one by one. I remember it started with a friend of mine who was named Patsy. Patsy's real name was Patrick, and he felt much more comfortable using his drag name, Patsy, as it made him feel much more like herself, so to speak. Patsy used to join us for drinks at the Black Rabbit most Friday nights, and occasionally he'd show up in drag to sing in the karaoke shows. Those were some of the most amazing, hilarious nights of my life, and Patsy really knew how to work a crowd. But then this one Friday, Patsy didn't show up, and Patsy always showed up to Friday night drinks. We were all pretty concerned for him, but it made sense when somebody closer to him than we were mentioned that he wasn't feeling like himself lately. There was a pretty nasty cold going around at the time, so we figured that he picked it up and was feeling under the weather. Then, the next Friday, he didn't show up again for Friday night drinks, and he wasn't the only one. A few more of the guys closest to Patsy weren't showing up at their regular haunts, and nobody could get a hold of them to find out what was going on. We eventually found where Patsy lived after talking to a club manager who had given him a part-time job. He had an address from his old copy of his payroll. We didn't know exactly what was going on at that time, and some of us actually thought that he might be depressed after a breakup or something, that it was some kind of mental health crisis, and that all Patsy needed was a little love, and he'd be back to his usual self. We couldn't have been more wrong. By the time we went to visit Patsy at his apartment, it was about 6 weeks since he first dropped off. Me and a friend of mine went over to his place only to find a moving truck outside. We didn't think anything of it at first, until we got up to Patsy's apartment and saw that the moving guys were in the process of emptying his apartment. His landlord was supervising the whole thing, so we asked what was going on and if he knew where Patsy was. That's when he tells us that Patsy's in the hospital, and that he hadn't paid rent in like 2 months, so he was moving all of his stuff into storage and would be sending Patsy the bill. All he knew was he was in the hospital, and he didn't know which hospital, so we set about calling up almost every hospital in the city just to find him. It took days, but eventually we found the place where Patsy was staying at. When we asked what was wrong with him, the nurse said that she couldn't tell us, but that we were free to visit during visiting hours so we could talk to him. We'd missed the allotted time slot for that day, so me and the friend that had helped me find Patsy agreed to meet up at Beth Israel the next day so we could go visit Patsy. But I don't think that we could have ever been ready for what we saw. When we walked into the room, we barely recognized the man we saw. Patsy was always a little plumper than most, probably because of his unapologetic love of pasta due to his Italian heritage. But the man we saw when we walked into that hospital room was little more than a skeleton. Patsy was wasting away in that hospital bed, and he was so weak that he could barely talk. We all just broke down crying without even really saying a word to each other, and I'll never forget how the tears pooled in Patsy's sunken eye sockets before they actually started rolling down his cheeks. We went back almost every day for almost a week, until one day we showed up and the nurse told us that we weren't permitted to visit with him anymore. When we asked why, the nurse told us that Patsy had some kind of infectious disease, and that it was too dangerous to sit with him unless we wore proper protective clothing. We insisted on it, that we didn't mind taking the risk, and we'd wear anything they'd asked us to in order to be able to visit him. They made us wear full gowns, gloves, a mask, a hairnet, like full surgeon's clothing just to be in the same room as him. Then one day, we went in to see Patsy, and we were told that he'd passed away in the night. There were lots of us in NYC at the time, much like myself, who had moved there because we didn't have anyone else. We had no family, none that wanted to know us anyway, and it was exactly the same with Patsy. We found out that no one was coming to claim his body or organize a funeral or burial for him, so if we wanted to have any kind of memorial, it was down to us to do it. Of course, we knew it was the right thing to do, and we knew Patsy had enough friends to pack out a church or a memorial hall or something. Only, that's how we found out how bad this whole thing was getting, when we organized a funeral and next to nobody showed up. It wasn't that he wasn't popular. It was a combination of two things. The first was that more and more of us were coming down with whatever horrifying disease that had taken Patsy, and the second was that so little was known about it, that people honestly thought that they could just catch it from being in the same room as his dead body. And then there was all the prejudice and bigotry that surrounded what they called GRIDS at the time. It stood for something like Gay-Related Immunodeficiency Syndrome or something. Like they still thought it was specific just to gay people, and even regular non-bigoted people just ate that up since it was coming from the scientific community. Over the years that followed, we were almost completely abandoned by everyone who had once supported us in our lifestyle choices. Me and the friend I was close to stopped dating completely since we were eventually told that it was spread through having intimacy. That was a weird relief to us because at least we knew how to avoid catching it by then, and as much as it was awful having to put our dating lives on hold, anything was better than dying in such a horrifying way. Things got better over the years, and I personally took part in a lot of activism to be able to spread the truth about GRIDS until it was finally reclassified with the name it's known as today, AIDS. That felt like a real victory, for people to know the truth about it and how even straight people could catch it if they weren't careful about drug use and safe contraception, all that kind of stuff. Then it wasn't just something that only gay men could get. It wasn't God's punishment, as so many evil bigots had said. We were all in it together, all united in fighting such a terrifying and insidious disease. When the likes of Freddie Mercury died from AIDS, as well as Eazy-E from the NWA rap group, that's when things started to get much better for us. Those were sad, sad deaths, and the gay community was devastated, especially for Freddie. But I remember being left with the impression that a lot of people didn't have to die, and that if they'd only listened to us instead of just dismissing our claims, that a lot more people would have been spared such horrible deaths. It's a time in my life that I'm still haunted by today. A time when it was like an invisible killer was stalking through our tight little community. So many of us had run away from getting hurt, beatings, and death, and it was like death had followed us. I don't know why that it got to be me that survived when so many of my adopted family didn't. I don't think I was doing anything different at the time, and I suppose it just comes down to luck that I was sleeping with certain people and not others. I still feel guilt, a lot of guilt, that people like Patsy, who used to light up the rooms that he was singing in, had to die, while I got to carry on living in the shadow of one of the most terrifying diseases the world has ever known. Back when I first moved up to New York, the fumes from the traffic outside made my asthma come back with a vengeance. I ended up going to a doctor, and he said that I didn't have to worry anymore because he had this top-of-the-line asthma medication that would completely rid me of my symptoms. I was over the moon when he told me that, as I was having a really rough time, like couldn't sleep and stuff because of it. So I got the prescription, hit up a local pharmacy for the pills, then got home and took like 3 of them immediately so I could finally get some decent sleep. I take the pills, take a shower, grab a bite to eat, and then I head to bed and read a book until my lungs untighten and I start to feel sleepy. I remember turning my lamp off before I settled down to go to sleep, and the last thing I did was cuddle my cat and be like, finally, we can get some sleep, don't it? From memory, this would have been maybe 10:30 at night, so it was still relatively early, especially by Brooklyn standards. Then at maybe 1:30 in the morning, I woke up, still with nice clear lungs, but when I opened my eyes, I saw a short, dark shape standing in the middle of my bedroom. I immediately shot up out of bed, switched on the lamp on my bedside table, and got ready to either kick whoever's butt or run screaming from the room. But when the light lit up the room, there was absolutely nothing there. It looked like it could have been a kid. It was that short, but then it was also way too bulky to be a kid. It looked like a smaller version of a large, muscular grown man. Needless to say, I was seriously unsettled by what I saw, or what I thought I saw, and the whole thing basically ruined any chance I had at a decent night's sleep, as I was absolutely terrified to see that thing again. I only really fell back asleep as I saw the dawn start to break outside, and then about an hour later I had to be up for work. The next day, I was terrified, talking to my friends in a group chat, but they just thought that it was hilarious, telling me that there's no such things as ghosts and whatnot, and that I must have just imagined the whole thing. When I saw on my grandma's grave that not a word of what I was saying was a lie, they just carried on making fun of me, telling me to get an exorcist and all this nonsense, and that if I was going to make up a ghost story, at least make it spooky. But I wasn't making anything up. I didn't believe in the supernatural or anything like that, but what I experienced had me seriously questioning whether I'd been right to just assume it was all nonsense. Because what else explained what I saw and how quickly it disappeared? When they finally started to believe me, one suggested I'd been experiencing some kind of sleep paralysis. They had a cousin that had gone through a literal nightmare of a time dealing with a condition that made it feel like there was some kind of demon in the room with them at night, and they couldn't do a single thing to stop it because they couldn't move. Only that didn't make sense because the moment I saw the shape of the thing, I jumped up and turned my light on to see if anything was there, which is right when the thing just seemed to completely disappear. That's when my buddy starts getting seriously concerned for me. I think he finally started to appreciate that I wasn't just making stuff up. After that, he actually starts trying to help me figure it all out, and we go through a ton of different medical conditions and stuff before he finally asked me if I'm on drugs. He meant like actual illegal drugs or whatever, but that's when it hit me. I was on a new medication for my asthma, and the medication was Singulair. I grabbed the box, took out the little piece of paper on the inside, then started reading through the side effects. That's how I found out that in some cases, your first few doses can cause waking dreams around your sleeping hours, like brief hallucinations that are basically just dreams bleeding over into reality. It was such a relief knowing I wasn't going crazy, and even more of a relief knowing that nothing remotely supernatural was going on, because I can't even describe how terrifying of a concept that was to me. I'd grown up not believing in anything like that, and that sudden but false realization that spirits, demons, whatever you want to call them, were real. That's a feeling of terror that I don't think I'll ever forget. So just a little warning out there. Be careful with Singulair, because as much as it did a great job in ridding me of my asthma symptoms, I went right back to using my inhaler. No, it wasn't nearly as effective, and I still had a lot of trouble sleeping for a while until I finally moved to a less air-polluted city. But it was way, way better than suffering from hallucinations, especially scary ones in the middle of the night. During the summer of 1977, New York City experienced the most intense heat waves of its long and fabled history. Temperatures peaked on July 21st at a blistering 104 degrees, and the sweltering temperatures became ingrained on the city's collective psyche. But for many, the heat isn't the only thing they remember about the summer of '77, because that same year, the streets of the Big Apple were stalked by one of the most deranged and merciless killers the city has ever known. The murders this person committed were wrapped up in a parcel of mental illness, depravity, and devil worship. And the name he gave himself was one that would strike fear into the hearts of New Yorkers for a generation. That name was Son of Sam. A year earlier, in the early hours of July 29th, 18-year-old Donna Lauria and her 19-year-old friend Jody Valenti were sitting in Valenti's Oldsmobile in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx. They had each spent the night at New Rochelle's Peach Trees, a popular disco venue in the area, and were engaged in a playful discussion regarding some boys they had spoken to that evening. It's believed that they were parked just outside Donna's Pelham Bay home, and when the conversation was over, Donna opened up the passenger side door with the intention of climbing out of the car. Yet as she did so, she was suddenly startled when she spotted a man who appeared to be approaching the car at a rapid pace. According to Jody Valenti, Donna found this sudden intrusion to be very irritating and said aloud, "Now what is this?" Those proved to be her final words, and almost as soon as she spoke, the strange man produced a pistol from a brown paper bag, aimed it with both hands, and opened fire. The first bullet ripped through Donna's skull, killing her instantly, while the second struck Jody in her left thigh. Then just as suddenly as he had appeared, the gunman turned and disappeared. Thankfully, Jody Valenti survived the gunshot wound, and later described her friend's killer to investigating homicide detectives. She told them that he was a white male in his early 30s who appeared to be around 5'8" and 200 pounds, with dark curly hair. Frighteningly, this description was echoed by Donna Lauria's father, who told police that he had spotted a man sitting in a yellow compact car that was parked near to his home on the very same night his daughter was shot. The Lauria's neighbors also confirmed a similar-looking vehicle had been cruising the neighborhood that night, as if the driver was searching for a particular person. 3 months later, 20-year-old Carl Denaro and his 18-year-old girlfriend Rosemary Keenan were sitting in their car in the Queens neighborhood of Flushing when one of the windows suddenly exploded inward. As they sped away, the couple didn't even realize that someone had been shooting at them, despite the fact that Carl was bleeding from a bullet wound to his head. He later said he believed it had been caused by flying glass and was stunned when he realized that if the bullet had traveled just a few inches to the left, his brains might have been blown out. Just a month after that, teenagers Donna DeMasi and Joanna Lamino were walking home from a midnight movie showing when a man in military-style fatigues approached them. They later told police that he began to ask them directions in a high-pitched voice. It suddenly stopped talking as he produced a revolver and opened fire. Each girl was shot once before their attacker fled the scene, and neighbors later said that they witnessed a blond man running away from the scene of the shooting with a revolver in his left hand. Miraculously, both girls survived the shooting, but Joanne Lamino was left paralyzed as a result of ballistic damage to her spine. 2 more shootings occurred in January and March of 1977, with each resulting in a single fatality, and the string of attack had left the panic-stricken citizenry of New York City demanding answers. This resulting in an NYPD press conference being held on March 10th of 1977, where it was officially announced that the same .44 Bulldog revolver had been used in each of the shootings. To their infinite horror, New Yorkers learned that a serial killer was stalking the streets of their beloved city, but they had no idea the intensity of the terrifying sequence of events that were about to unfold. Just after 3 a.m. on April 17th, college-age couple Valentina Seriani and Alexander Esau were sitting in their car on the Hutchinson River Parkway service road in the Bronx. They were just a few blocks away from the Loria Valenti shooting when 4 bullets ripped through the frame of the vehicle. Both were shot in the head, and tragically, both would lose their lives as a result of the shooting. New Yorkers were horrified, but not nearly as horrified as they would be when they learned of the handwritten letter that was found near the victims' bodies. It was written mostly in black capitals and was addressed to the NYPD captain Joseph Borelli, and despite attempts to keep the letter's contents a secret, a number of excerpts were subsequently leaked to reporters. Some of it read as follows, and some listeners may find it to be extremely disturbing. I am the son of Sam, and I am a monster. Sam loves to drink blood. Go out and kill, commands Father Sam. Behind our house some rest, mostly young, their blood drained, just bones now. I am on a different wavelength than everyone else, programmed to kill, and to stop me, you must kill me. I am the monster. I am Beelzebub. I love to hunt. I live for the hunt, prowling the streets looking for fair game, tasty meat. Let me haunt you with these words. I'll be back. I'll be back. Bang, bang, bang. Yours in murder, Mr. Monster. Media outlets consulted scores of psychologists who noted that the killer seemed to gain a great deal of gratification from eluding law enforcement. Police then released a psychological profile of their suspect, who was described as most probably suffering from an intense form of paranoid schizophrenia, which in turn manifested itself in the belief that they were a victim of demonic possession. Just over a month after the handwritten letters were discovered next to the bodies of Alexander Esau and Valentina Seriani, Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin received a handwritten letter from someone who claimed to be the son of Sam. On the envelope, neatly hand-printed in 4 precisely centered letters, were the words, blood and family, darkness and death, absolute depravity, 44. Some of the letter reads as follows. Hello from the gutters of NYC, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. Hello from the sewers of NYC, which swallow up these delicacies when they are washed away by the sweeper trucks. Hello from the cracks in the sidewalks of NYC, and from the ants that dwell in these cracks and feed in the dried blood of the dead that has settled into the cracks. The killer then addressed Jimmy Breslin himself with the line, JB, I'm just dropping you a line to let you know that I appreciate your interest in those recent and horrendous 44 killings. But you can forget about me if you like, because I don't care for publicity. However, you must not forget Donna Loria. She was a very sweet girl, but Sam's a thirsty lad, and he won't let me stop killing until he gets his fill of blood. I am like a spirit roaming the night. thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest, anxious to please Sam. The letter's author signed it simply Son of Sam, and underneath the sign-off was a series of several symbols. The author also included the moniker the Wicked King Wicker, which furthered law enforcement's belief that the killer held a fascination with the occult. As a result, the NYPD arranged a private screening of the 1973 occult horror movie The Wicker Man and encouraged its homicide detectives to attend. A week later, the New York Daily News published the letter, and Jimmy Breslin personally urged the killer to surrender himself. The edition of the paper which included the latter article became the highest-selling edition in the Daily News history, with over 1 million copies being sold all over the tri-state area. What had once been a panic among New Yorkers turned into a frenzy, and some took certain steps in order to avoid becoming victims themselves. It was noted that all the shooting victims to date had long, dark hair, and in response, thousands of New York females cut their hair short and applied brightly colored dyes, with some even purchasing blonde wigs in the hopes of avoiding the killer's attention. The demand was so great that there was a mass shortage of wigs in the city, and businesses that were in possession of them ramped up the price to make a quick buck, much to the ire of the general public. June of 1977 saw Son of Sam return to his grisly work, when Sal Lupo and his girlfriend, Judy Placido, were shot at close range in a nightclub parking lot just before 3 in the morning. Thankfully, both victims survived their wounds, but one of Son of Sam's next victims would not be so lucky. Just 2 days after the 1-year anniversary of the first shootings, Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante were sitting in the latter's car, parked under a streetlight near a city park in the neighborhood of Bath Beach. They were on the first date, and romance was very much in the air, so much so that they were completely unaware of a man approaching the passenger side of the vehicle. The man fired 4 bullets into the car, striking both Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante in the head before fleeing the scene. Robert was blinded in his left eye as a result of the attack, while sadly, Stacy passed away as a result of her injuries. Moskowitz's passing marked the 6th Son of Sam murder in just over a year, and New York City had been driven half mad with fear and suspicion. But it was that same suspicion, along with excellent police work, that finally brought the Son of Sam to justice. Given that 2 murders had occurred in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx, parking was temporarily forbidden in an area of almost 5 square blocks, and any car that lingered too long was investigated and ticketed. This is how a 1970 4-door yellow Ford Galaxy came to the police's attention, and they noted with grim interest that it matched the description of the car that was in Donna Loria's neighborhood on the night that she was killed. When the police contacted New York's Department of Motor Vehicles, they discovered the vehicle was registered to a one Mr. David Berkowitz, who lived up in Yonkers. The next day, police investigated Berkowitz's car, which was parked on the street outside his apartment building. It was then that they spotted a revolver in the back seat, and after searching the car, they also found a duffel bag filled with ammunition, maps of the crime scenes, and a threatening letter addressed to Inspector Timothy Dowd of the Omega Task Force. After that, it was clear. Berkowitz was the Son of Sam. All they needed was an arrest and a confession. But given how dangerously violent the Son of Sam was, police decided to wait for Berkowitz to leave the apartment rather than risk a violent encounter in the building's narrow hallway. They also needed to wait until a search warrant for the apartment could be properly obtained, as officers were terrified that their search might be challenged in court and that the infamous killer they'd longed searched for would subsequently slip through their fingers. When Berkowitz exited the apartment building at about 10 p.m., a detective, John Falatico, approached the driver's side of his car and pointed his gun close to Berkowitz's temple, all while Detective Sergeant William Gardella pointed his gun from the passenger side. It's then that Berkowitz smiled, looked up at Detective Falatico and said, "Well, you got me." "Now that I've got you," Detective Falatico responded, "who have I got?" "You know," Berkowitz said, in what Falatico remembered as a sweet, almost childlike voice. "No, I don't. Tell me." he replied. Berkowitz, still smiling, simply replied, "My name is David Berkowitz, and I am the son of Sam." Upon searching Berkowitz's apartment, police officers discovered it was covered in satanic graffiti. They also found diaries that he had kept since he was 21 years old, in which Berkowitz had meticulously noted hundreds of arsons that he claimed to have set throughout New York City. Some sources speculate that this number might be over 1,400. Just after 1 a.m. on the morning of August 11, 1977, Mayor Abraham Beame was visibly relieved as he announced to the media that the people of the city of New York can rest easy because of the fact that the police have captured a man whom they believe to be the son of Sam. All it took was 30 minutes of interrogation before Berkowitz confessed to the shootings and expressed an interest in pleading guilty. Berkowitz then made the outrageous and infamous claim that his neighbor's dog was one of the reasons that he killed, stating that the dog was possessed by an ancient demon and that it demanded the blood of pretty young girls. A few weeks after his arrest, Berkowitz sent a letter to the New York Post in which he repeated his original story of demonic possession, yet toward the end of it, he made an extremely chilling claim. "There are other sons out there," he wrote. "God help the world." Finally, on June 12th of 1978, David Richard Berkowitz was handed 6 consecutive life sentences to be served in Attica Correctional Facility, an upstate New York supermax prison. But that wasn't the end of Berkowitz's story, because as he'd made it clear, there are other sons out there. And once he was locked up, he was determined to prove that he wasn't the only killer that had stalked the streets of New York during that long, hot summer. In the year that followed his incarceration, Berkowitz mailed a book about witchcraft to a police department in North Dakota. He had highlighted several of the book's passages and had written notes in the margins, including Arliss Perry, hunted, stalked, and slain, followed to California Stanford University. This was in reference to the murder of 19-year-old Arliss Perry, who had been killed at Stanford on October 12th of 1974. Even more horrifying was the fact that her corpse had been mutilated in the Stanford campus chapel, with Berkowitz claiming that not only was this a deliberate act of Satan worship, but that he had personally communicated with Arliss's killer. Berkowitz went on to claim that he had killed at the behest of a satanic cult that he had joined in the spring of 1975, and stunned the general public when he claimed that he was only guilty of the murders of Donna Loria, Alexander Esau, and Valentina Suriani. He asserted that several other cult members were involved in every incident by planning the events, providing early surveillance of the victims, and acting as lookouts and drivers at the crime scene. Yet when asked to provide the names of his accomplices, he claimed that he wouldn't be able to without putting his family's lives at risk. At this point, Berkowitz seemed to make a very convincing assertion, and that was how some victims had only survived because a female cult member was unfamiliar with the powerful recoil of a .44 Bulldog. This negatively affected her accuracy, which in turn saved the lives of Carl Denaro and Rosemary Keenan. Despite the feasibility of such a claim, Berkowitz's assertions were dismissed by many of those close to the case, one of which was the recipient of one of his letters, Jimmy Breslin. Breslin rejected his story of satanic cult accomplices, stating that when they talked to David Berkowitz that night, he recalled everything step by step by step. The guy has 1,000% recall and that's it. He's the guy and there's nothing else to look at. Former FBI profiler John E. Douglas, who spent hours interviewing Berkowitz, also expressed his skepticism. He argued that David was an introverted loner, incapable of being involved in group activity. NYPD psychologist Dr. Harvey Schlossberg also stated that he believes the satanic cult claims are nothing but a fantasy concocted by Berkowitz to absolve himself of the crimes, and lacks any serious credibility. In the decades that followed David Berkowitz's arrest and incarceration, the Son of Sam killings remained some of the most notorious serial murders in world history. Not just for their brutality and insane motives, but for the fear they struck in the hearts of innocent New Yorkers all over the city. Berkowitz himself continues to express remorse on Christian websites, having taken up evangelical Christianity in an attempt to save his soul. But if there is anything resembling a just God that casts judgment on us when we die, then I've no doubt whatsoever that David Berkowitz is destined to burn in hell. Hey Joel, found your channel a few weeks back and I have a story for you. I used to live in this apartment building in Queens, New York City, and this one time, some nice lady invited us to an apartment warming when she moved into our building. It was pretty cool. It was nice to meet some of the people in my building that I'd never spoken to in all the years I'd been there, and it was only a handful of people with some bottles of wine, so it wasn't too crazy. But then at one point, right when everyone is talking, we just hear this scream that sounded like it came from down this lady's hallway near her bathroom. Me and this other guy went to investigate thinking someone from the party had gotten hurt or something, but then realized that not only were the bathroom and bedroom empty, but no one from the party was actually missing. We're just kind of like, so if it wasn't one of us, who screamed? It was way too loud and clear to have come from another apartment, but there was no one there when we went to look, which was instantly after we'd heard it. It totally killed the mood of the party, and we all left not long after with the lady who just moved in being kind of scared to be alone. I would be too. She moved a little while after too, and the apartment had stayed empty ever since. I'm not saying that I live in a haunted apartment building or anything like that. I'm not a person who believes in the ghosts or ghoulies or anything, but something bad definitely happened in that apartment that night. I just don't know what. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear about all these stories and big compilations and save huge on data, located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and remember, your mom knits socks that smell.